Glad to see you all. Welcome to the Community Board 4 Chelsea Land Use Committee meeting. My name is Betty McIntosh. Paul Devlin and I are co-chairs of this committee, which usually meets monthly. This is our October meeting. As per the governor's order, we have been meeting remotely. This meeting is being recorded and is currently live streaming on YouTube. It will be accessible later. The agenda and materials for tonight are public and can be viewed on the Community Board 4 website. I encourage you to sign up for e-blasts to get the agenda and a link to the meeting documents beforehand.
Betty, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify something because I think you said this last time too. So just for the public, we put the agenda is open to the is publicly available on our website. Not all of the presentations are. So I just want people to understand.
I'll take that off. Okay.
So if the public does want a copy of the presentation after the fact, we can certainly provide it for them.
Okay. Thank you. If this is your first time at a Community Board 4 meeting, there are 3 things to know about the process. After each presentation, first, the committee will ask questions to the presenter, and then members of the public, attendees, can ask questions or make a comment. Subsequently, the discussion will go back to the committee. Number 2, on some agenda items, the committee members may ask questions to the presenter, and then members of the public can ask questions or make a comment. On some agenda items, committee members may next vote to make a recommendation, which usually results in a letter to the full board to vote on. If you want to comment or ask a question after a presentation and after the committee has spoken, you must press the raised hand button on your screen, usually on the bottom right. If you're calling in, use *9 to raise your hand or *6 to unmute. If you have any questions about the information I've shared, you can raise your hand now. Paul, I think, would you like to introduce committee members?
I'd be happy to. I'm Paul Devlin, co-chair with Betty. Thank you very much. Let's start with Pam.
I'm Pamela Wolf. I'm a public member of CB4, serving on this committee only.
Twee.
Hi, I'm Twee Pham, member of the Chelsea Land Use Committee.
Tina.
Hi, I'm Tina DeFelicia Antonio. I live on West 26 between 6th and 7th.
Renal.
Hi, I'm Renal Vikram. I'm on 14th Street between 7th Avenue and 14th Street, and I'm a member of the Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee, as well as the Chelsea Land Use Committee.
Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie Keenan. I live on West 21st, and I am a committee member.
Kit.
Evening, everybody. Kit Tallerson. I'm on 22nd near 9th Avenue, and I'm also on the ACES committee, which I'm one of the co-chairs of.
Bert.
I am Bert Lazarin, 24th Street and 10th Avenue for many, many years. And in addition to the Chelsea Land Use Committee, I'm co-chair of the Business License and Permits Committee.
Dave.
I'm Dave Holoka. I live between 9th and 10th Avenue on 19th Street, and I'm a member of this committee.
Viren.
Hi, I'm Viren Brambles, architect of Urban Nirvana. I live in Chelsea, 20th Street, part of the CLU committee.
And Peggy.
Hi, good evening. Peggy Coe. I live at 9th Avenue and 22nd Street, and I also sit on the BLP, the Business License and Permit Committee. Thanks.
I think that's everyone now. So Betty, back to you.
Okay. We have a full agenda tonight, And our first presentation is about 128 West 17th Street, former colored school number 4. After that, we're going to have a discussion and vote about statement of district needs and budget requests. And then we're going to have some old new business, in particular, a discussion about 9th Avenue and West 14th Street historic row houses. So without further ado, we're going to move to Eric Washington, who is going to introduce himself further and has a presentation that we're going to be watching. Eric?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hi, I'm Eric A. Washington. I'm a local historian. I'm going to be talking about this building, 128 West 17th Street, formerly known as Colored School number 4, which I've been researching for a few years for a book that I did 2 years ago. I wanted to give some background on it. So I'll give you the background on the historical background on the building and what measures I had taken thus far from landmarks. In November 2018, I filed an RFE, a request for evaluation, to the city's Landmarks Preservation Commission concerning this building, 128 West 17th Street. I recommended that it be designated as a site of architectural, historical, and cultural significance to the African-American contribution to the city's history. The LPC's response was timely and positive, but with no substantive information forthcoming in 3 years. So I appreciate this opportunity to share some informational background about the site. Originally called Colored School number 4, then later Grammar School number 81, this 3-story brick building on 17th Street recalls New York City's official racial caste education system that lasted throughout most of the 19th century. Historically, this was one of a series of schoolhouses that evolved from the African free school system established in 1787 by the New York Manumission Society to educate Black children at the beginning of what became a protracted process of gradually abolishing race-based slavery statewide. In fact, the African free schools preceded New York City's general public school system for white children established around 1805. Built circa 1868, 1869, the 17th Street structure is a rare Reconstruction era example of the model primary schoolhouse, an earlier architectural plan adopted in 1844 for grade schools throughout Manhattan by the Public School Society, which in 1853 merged with the Board of Ed as part of the city's ward school system. Give or take some variations, the dispersed schoolhouses basically followed the prescribed exterior and interior plans, which Colored School number 4 also mirrored. Here, you see, compared to the 1840s rendering on the left, is how the old schoolhouse appeared around 1908 at the top right, 1940 in the text photo, the black and white one below, and then today. To my knowledge, the 17th Street building represents—
Hold on, Eric, 1 second. You're gonna have to move slide. You're referring to slides that we're not seeing. We're still seeing the very first slide.
Okay. You're not seeing?
No, we're only seeing the very initial slide with the car parked in front of the building.
Okay, I'm going to—
There you go. Now you're sliding down. Okay. You're gonna have to click through each slide as you move along.
Okay.
So now we're seeing, there you go. That's the one you were just talking about.
Okay. So anyway, those are the comparison of the plan and how the building looked in various stages, 1908, 1940, and presently. To my knowledge, this is Manhattan's only surviving colored schoolhouse, and possibly the borough's oldest extant public education facility as well. But Colored Schoolhouse number 4 was a model school in other ways. The school's driving spirit was Sarah J.S. Tompkins. Her appointment on April 30th, 1863 as the Civil War raged, made her the city's first Black public school principal. Tompkins was a highly influential educator and community activist throughout her tenure. In March 1871, she initiated a series of public lectures at the schoolhouse. The first speaker was the Reverend Henry Highland Garnett, renowned former abolitionist, orator, and statesman, whom Tompkins married 9 years later, becoming thereafter familiar as Sarah Garnett. Other notable visitors to this school included Lieutenant Governor Oscar Dunn of Louisiana. This is during the Reconstruction era. Sir James Bain, Lord Provost of Glasgow, who came here during the 1876, the centennial year, and Ednor Nahar, an elocutionist. Newspapers also cited the school's engagement during notable events, including presidential inauguration of Ulysses S. Grant in 1869, the memorial to U.S. Senator Charles Sumner in 1874, and an onstage participation in Louise A. Smith's play, The Little Mountain Fairies, at the famous Chickering Hall. By the early 1880s, the state legislature was poised to let the Board of Ed absorb its handful of Jim Crow colored schools into the general system. They were admittedly sad relics of the slavery era, and yet the diligence of Black educators had bestowed them with a distinct pride of place in the African-American communities that they served. Here, on the edge of what was then the notorious Tenderloin district, the proposed closure of these schools galvanized Sarah Garnett and others to a mass protest. Reportedly encouraged by a letter from Frederick Douglass, they implored the Board of Ed either to retain Black teachers as equals with white teachers, or else to leave the colored schools as they were. Ultimately, in 1884, a legislative act signed by then New York State Governor Grover Cleveland spared just two of the separate race-based schools. One of them was Colored School Number 4, thereafter designated Grammar School Number 81. But 10 years later, in 1894, the Board of Ed resolved to sell the building, being no longer required for school purposes. For her part, Sarah Garnett remained an activist, educator, community leader, and suffragist. In 1895, she co-founded an association to build a community hospital. Later, in her native Brooklyn, she and her sister Susan McKinney Stewart, who was the state's first Black woman to earn a medical degree, founded the Equal Suffrage League, which in 1908 joined with the National Association of Colored Women to petition the US Congress for women's right to vote. At her memorial in 1911, personal testimonials were heard from her active allies, civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois and redoubtable journalist Ida B. Wells Barnett. 2 years ago, an unrelated Brooklyn public school was renamed in her honor. The school's other remarkable teachers included J. Imogen Howard. In 1893, Howard represented New York State at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the only Black manager at that World's Fair. Similarly, in 1900, she was the only Black educator of 5 whom the Evening Telegram treated to the Paris Exposition as winners of its Great Teachers Competition. Susan Elizabeth Frazier, who was New York City's first Black teacher assigned to a mixed school. Also unseen, William Appo, Richard Richardson, 2 of the most influential African-American music educators in the latter half of the 19th century, worked at this school. Notable graduates included Walter F. Craig, acclaimed violinist and composer. He was the first Black member of the all-white musical Mutual Protective Union. His was one of the preeminent late 19th and early 20th century society orchestras for both Black and white audiences, and prolific Freemasonry historian Harry Williamson. And close to my heart, the eponymous subject of my biography, Boss of the Grips, the life of James H. Williams and the Redcaps of Grand Central Terminal. As the station's chief Redcap attendant for nearly half a century, Williams at Grand Central presided over its essential Harlem-based workforce that produced the city's first Black police officer, Columbia's first Black architecture school graduate, and such still familiar names as Paul Robeson and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And finally, The property appears to have belonged to the Department of Sanitation since about the 1930s. Its exterior is basically intact. At least since the time of the 1940 tax photo, the original brick facade has been painted over by a white glazed veneer. The modest cornice is gone, but the 16/16 light double hung sash windows appear original, as you can see. So I hope that the Chelsea Land Use Committee concurs that all of these things attest to the site's architectural, historical, and cultural significance. And if so, I hope that the committee would issue an official letter of support to that effect to be copied to the Landmarks Preservation Commissioners and appropriate representatives and entities who could expedite the site's long overdue recognition. And thank you very much for this time to share.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that, and we all appreciate that. Very impressive presentation. I had a couple of factual questions, and then everybody will join in the discussion. I was wondering what city agency currently has jurisdiction of the building?
The Department of Sanitation.
Okay. And does any city agency have plans to occupy the building?
Not that I'm aware of. It doesn't seem to have any kind of essential use, and this is just from observation. This last slide that's still on the screen to the left are pictures I took when I filed the RFE in 2018, and 3 years later, Tom Lunke, who's with us, took these. He lives around the corner, basically, this afternoon. So nothing seems dramatically changed in terms of the building. It's just kind of been there. I haven't been able to get access inside, so I don't know what it's actually used for.
And are there any historic preservation organizations interested in restoring the building or using it for a museum or community facility?
Not to my knowledge. I've talked to people sort of anecdotally. People are interested in the building, think that it should be saved, but I haven't. I'm not aware of anybody having any definite or even indefinite plans to use it for a specific purpose.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, David?
Eric, thank you very much for that fascinating presentation. I'll follow on Betty's question about who oversees the building now. I'm going to assume that it's owned by New York City. Is that correct?
Right. As a matter of fact, that one of the earlier images from 1908 is from a book, Real Estate Owned by the City of New York. I think that's probably what saved it, because when it discontinued as a school, it didn't seem to have gone on to the market, even though that's what they said they were going to do, and just went to another city agency. Afterwards, it was sort of a home for veteran firemen, particularly those who had participated as zouaves during like the Civil War. And I say that tax photo at the bottom, it says Department of Sanitation, and that's about 1940. So that's why I said at least since about then, it seems to have been in sanitation's hands.
Have you sought listing on the State and National Register of Historic Places?
I did. I was told that they had to have the owner's permission for them to deal with it, before it could be listed.
That suggests to me that we might want to press the city to give permission for that. And ordinarily, a State and National Register listing doesn't do much to actually protect a building in New York, because it only prevents alteration or demolition using public funds. But given that the city owns this building, it would need to use public funds to demolish or alter it. And that listing would at least help preserve it until the Landmarks Commission does the right thing and designates it an individual New York City landmark. And the Landmarks Commission has made a big thing of late of its so-called equity framework, which seeks to give more recognition and protection to buildings that relate to non-mainstream history in New York, including African-American history, and this would seem a prime candidate. And I think that's something that we should list in our letter.
Okay, thank you, David, for bringing that up. Viren?
Hi, thank you. I think David covered the last question that in the last sort of suggestion about equity. I think that's where this could actually qualify. We could make a stronger case for its qualification. The only other question I have is, I think you probably answered it, but is the building occupied currently at all?
I can't tell. So my clearest contact is I have a friend who worked for sanitation, and she was trying to get access, and it wasn't her department, so she wasn't able to do it either. So I don't have an impression that it is occupied in the sense of there being a constant filing of people going in and out. And my impression, and it's only that, is that if it's being used, it's a minimal staff and maybe like more of a warehousing kind of facility.
I looked at it yesterday and I peered in through the windows and it looked extremely unoccupied.
Okay.
It looked in real disuse. Not that it was crumbling, but it looked like nobody had been in there a long time.
Yeah. Okay, and I think I just looked up also online the ownership. It is owned by Department of Sanitation. It's city-owned, but it's particularly sort of owner is mentioned as Department of Sanitation compared to DCAS. So that's probably is something that may sort of, I don't know exactly what that might do in terms of reaching out to the city, because typically city-owned buildings are administered by DCAS. But this, for some reasons, is listed under Department of Sanitation. And that might have something to do with underlying land use or zoning, which might require sort of further research, but I think you can throw it on Landmark's head to follow through.
Okay, Viren? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
No, I looked up the zoning. It's zone C62A, commercial FAR of 6, residential of 6.02, community facility FAR, residential district equivalent R8A. So it could have several uses theoretically in that district. Anyway, let's see, who's next? Bert?
Yeah. Hi. I just want to say thank you so much, Eric, for all the research you've done and all the work you've done, bringing this to people's awareness. I heard someone say non-mainstream. Well, I think as someone who grew up in New York City, who was taught in New York City public schools, there's a whole history of my city that have not been taught. And I don't think is being taught now. I mean, if you asked a kid, most kids in New York City, was there officially segregated schools in New York City? They have no idea. They'd say, no, of course not. Well, this is part of our history, and it should be prominently known and taught. And I just was very moved by your presentation, all the people involved. And I'm glad first I thought when I saw the picture, I thought maybe it had been turned into a residence, and that would make it really complicated.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's still city owned. I'm glad for that. Whatever mysterious use the Department of Sanitation has for it. I do have I'm curious to know if the school was all boys or was it co-ed?
It was co-ed.
It was co-ed.
Yes. As a matter of fact, one of the teachers that I mentioned had been Susan Elizabeth Frazier, as I understand it, had been a student of the school.
Oh, she had been okay. Because I wasn't clear. And I mean, I don't know how schools were arranged in those days in terms of, gender. If they had all boys schools or girls schools, whatever.
I think even the two doors on either side were once labeled boys, girls. As
cool.
separate entrances. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again very much.
Thanks, Bert. Pam?
Yes, I'd like to second everything that Bert has said. As far as what is taught in the schools presently, there should certainly be some change in that. I think I've passed that building frequently. I'm so delighted to hear of its history. I understand that the two doors represent boys and girls doors, as on the Catholic school on the same block. That's fascinating. Also fascinating is the fact that the windows, the divisions of the lights of the windows, that it survived is just miraculous, and probably through decades of benign neglect that the windows didn't get replaced. I would offer to Eric that perhaps he would consider reaching out to the neighborhood group Save Chelsea for some further support from the community as far as you're approaching the Preservation Commission. I would give you a little heads up warning. We in the Chelsea neighborhood dealt some years ago with a building that had been surrendered, that was in the process of being surrendered by the Department of Sanitation. It was on 20th Street between 6th and 7th Avenues. A little bit different zoning situation, I think. But the community had understood for years that if sanitation ever had no further use for that building, it was to become a park. Once it was given up by sanitation and we looked forward to a park, we discovered it had already been deeded over to the DOB. And we went through a major years-long struggle to reclaim that right to the promise that we had originally been given. As you know, probably there is presently a park in that location, so it's not an impossible task. And I just wanted to suggest that maybe this is something that should be dealt with sooner rather than later, just to get ahead of the moving target there. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks, Pam.
Mhm.
Mirel?
Thanks, Betty. Just to echo what Pam just said and everybody else just said, I think it's just a fascinating story. And I mean, and the story of Sarah Garnett, I mean, it's mind-boggling that it's not been told. And at least there is one school in Brooklyn that's honoring her legacy. So that's great. Thank you so much for that, Derek. Do we think that it makes sense to put in a letter to the sanitation department as well? And if the building's falling into disrepair, I mean, we could at least ask them what they plan to do with the building, if they don't have a plan, if they have any plans to just, do they have a plan for the upkeep in the meanwhile?
Okay, that's a good point. The upkeep. I know I was feeling that it was looking a bit neglected when I looked in the windows. So it's a good point. Paul?
Eric, thanks so much again for this. I think I'm echoing the voices of many members on the committee that this is, very important historic component of our neighborhood, and I'm glad that there's a discussion about moving forward with this. So thank you for that. And Pam raised this, and I think when you met with us briefly, I had asked also about local supporters and outreach to other groups besides the community board to build a momentum of support. So I'd echo Pam's urging you to reach out to Save Chelsea or any of the preservation groups, any of the block associations, the incoming city council member. It helps when we have many voices speaking in favor of this and not just yours and ours. So I'd urge you to do that. And just to share with the rest of the committee, I have letters, and we're going to try to incorporate. There's a church in Hell's Kitchen, St. Benedict's, that's also part of sort of the Black history of the district. And we have requested designation of that church in Hell's Kitchen a number of times without success. But there is clearly an important cultural significance to the migration of Black Americans that go from the West Village through Hell's Kitchen and up into Harlem. And there are many sites here in our neighborhood, in our district, that should be designated as culturally significant. So that's a component of our letter that we're going to also consider, given that this committee votes in favor of sending a recommendation to designate this as a historic site.
Good point. Twee?
I'm not familiar with this particular block, so it looks to be flanked by a school on one side and then condominiums on the other side. So I guess the question is, as part of getting support, would it be helpful to try to get support of entities on that particular block as well?
Eric, do you want to respond to that?
Possibly. I don't know the block. What I know best on the block is across the street, Housing Works, if that's still there. And the school was St. Francis Xavier, which doesn't use that building anymore. It's another school that uses that building. So I don't. It's kind of, the block is kind of a hodgepodge. I think there's that museum on the same side of the street, south side of the street, closer to 7th Avenue. I'm forgetting the name of it. So there's a cultural center. There's a lot of commercial centers. I think there are even a couple of restaurants there. So that might be, they might find some interest in knowing what the building was and seeing some value in having it landmarked as a neighbor.
Okay, I know what you're talking about, and the name of that museum just left my brain.
Yeah, I'm having
The Reuben
Museum.
Reuben, yeah,
Yes,
there we go.
thank you.
The Reuben. Yeah.
Ruden, I think it is. Yeah.
Let's see, where are we at now? Kit, did you talk yet? No, Kit?
I have not. Thank you for the presentation. Fascinating, and agree with all the comments about how it's essential we start teaching what's really happened in New York City and move beyond the narrative that is just incomplete. I was curious, Mr. Washington, if you have engaged with any organizations like the New York Historical Society. I know that museums in the city, including the New York Historical Society, sometimes do not have the space that they want. And many museums actually have networks of facilities throughout the city. I imagine they have many priorities and may not have the budget for getting this space and or getting it to a place where it was usable. But I just wonder if an institution like that, if not that one, might be excited about your project and or might be an ally in trying to think about not just how do we get this recognized as the landmark that it is, but what's a potential future use that could be one that honors its history.
Let me just add, do you mean as a sympathetic ally, or maybe in terms of like annexing it as a part of the museum?
Both. For the annexing, I have no idea what their financial situation is and what their appetite for that might be. But I do know that at some point they were talking about an annex or a second site. And I don't know where those conversations went, but perhaps they or an institution like them might be interested in learning about what you've been up to and partnering with you, furthering your efforts in some way.
It's actually something that I thought about, not particularly with NYHS, but possibly with the Schomburg. So I'm actually glad to hear somebody thinking of the same thing there. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken one time that I'm missing? No, okay, back to David.
I just want to add, if I'm happy to leave, I sent Jesse a copy. So if anyone wants to look at these at your leisure, because I know when you're breezing through slides, miss a lot.
Betty, there is somebody in the attendees who has their hand raised. If you want to flip over to attendees now, and then come back to me.
Okay, can you guys put the attendees over?
Someone named Tom.
Tom. Yes.
Tom?
I think he's with you, Eric, right?
Yes.
Yes, he's
Oh.
coming over now.
And while we're waiting for this migration, we should probably remind other members of the public, if they want to speak on this, they should raise their hand.
Hello, hi. I'm Tom Lunke. Thank you for having me on this Zoom. I'm not that familiar with Zoom, so I may be a little hesitant in how I present myself, but I'm a 30-year resident and a former member of Community Board 4 from 97 to 2003. And I've worked with Eric for years in my capacity as an urban planner in Harlem, and of course, but I'm retired now, so I'm not in Harlem. I'm here in Chelsea, and I wholeheartedly support Eric's efforts in this. He does an excellent scholarship in his research, and I didn't even know about this building. As I believe Mr. Devlin said, there are far few representative buildings that are designated landmarks in the district, and I, for one, would love to see more that represent African-American contributions to our society, in addition, of course, to other groups of people besides just Caucasians. So I support that. I wanted to talk briefly about, funny enough, worked for DCAS and the Department of Sanitation in urban planning capacities back in the 90s. And this to me looks like it's probably considered a section station, which pre-COVID would be a place where sanitation workers would stop and eat their lunch in a, in an enclosed setting. DCAS assigns property to agencies, but as Eric has found out, this has been in sanitation's hands since the 1940s. So that would predate DCAS. Maybe the Department of General Services, DCAS's former name, may have had the same type of role to play back in the 1940s in terms of assigning agencies properties. So that's just a little bit of my understanding of how these things work. And I'm just very glad that all of you seem to endorse this project. I love to see a letter come from the committee and voted on by the full board and directed to landmarks and the elected officials. And I'm sure that I can work with Eric in trying to secure some other local community groups, including Pamela's Save Chelsea organization. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for that tidbit about it's called a section building?
Section station. Mm-hmm.
Station, okay. And that makes me think, Eric, have you ever talked to the Department of Sanitation about this building?
No, for a couple of reasons. I didn't know because it has a lot of departments. And I guess just from my old New Yorker sense of being careful about what you speak about, I would like to feel a little bit secure in the strategy of telling somebody like, I'm interested in maybe this building being landmarked, because if they oppose it, might they be able to do something that sabotages its eligibility?
Yeah, that's good strategy. Okay. Are there more attendees, Paul? No? Okay. So we're gonna, on the last chapter here, David?
Yeah, I'm actually glad that Eric mentioned that. I might want to rethink our writing to the Department of Sanitation. I mean, they could sell the building. And then even if it had national or state and national register listing, it could be demolished using private funds. I think the main thing may be to focus on getting the landmarks designation. And Eric, have you met with your city council member, with Corey Johnson, about this at all, or any of his staff? Because they typically are the champion for landmarking of a building like this.
No, I've only reached out in terms of email, and but I haven't had an opportunity to talk to him. I reached out to Mark Levine, but I haven't been able to sit with anybody yet. So I'm still reaching out to whomever will enter my email.
I think for our letter, we'll want to let landmarks know when the request for evaluation was first sent. And did you say that was November 2017?
No, 2018. They got back to me in 2 months in January 2019. Then, and I know they're backlogged. This past April, I sent another letter just to see if I could learn something of the status, and just as in a timely way as well, she got back to me and said the building is is being researched, and that was it. So now that was April, and we're in October. So, and that doesn't really say anything. So there's been nothing substantive, and that's not to say that they're not really doing anything. It's just that doesn't seem to be a sort of a channel for finding out what the status is of your file, your submission.
Right. I think we want to just let landmarks know it's been a fair amount of time. They've had time to research this. At a certain point, you don't need to research it to death if there's enough evidence that it.
Also, they know the story because they landmarked about 20 years ago. They landmarked colored school number 3 in Brooklyn. Brooklyn was a separate city, but they know the background. It's basic, so it's not from scratch.
Right. Okay.
Good to remind us about, there's a precedent for this sort of school. Pam, I'm going to skip over you for a minute because we have Marty DeCat here. Marty?
I apologize for coming late. I appreciate hearing this conversation. And in the conversation, I have not heard anything, 2 aspects. Funding for whatever you're going to do with the building, other than just landmark it. Have you thought, I'm sure you've thought of programs. And what are those programs? Funding will be a big issue.
I'm sure it will be. I mean, I think just sort of from my point of view, taking first steps first is trying to get it landmarked. I can think of a number of possible programs, from tours that emanate from there, as a gallery space, speakers programs. Toying in the back of my head this idea that I'm sorry, I forgot your name, of maybe another organization, a historical organization, annexing it in some way, and so using it for programs that they can't do on their own proper sites. So I haven't gone that far. My first step was to see about getting it landmarked. So I did that 3 years ago. And my main focus wasn't the school. I was researching it out of the story that I was writing for my book. Now the book has come out, and it's in the book, and and that's nothing has happened. I still haven't heard word. So I don't.
What's the name of your book, Eric?
Boss of the Grips: The Life of James H. Williams and the Red Caps of Grand Central Terminal.
Oh, you told us that earlier. Sorry.
He would have been one of the last students before the school was discontinued. He grew up. He was born on 15th Street, so essentially around the corner, and his house is still there.
Okay.
I know that we have some landmarks that relate to Black history in the Chelsea Hell's Kitchen neighborhood, including the site on 29th Street, Underground Railroad, and not a specific site, but there was the orphans, the Black orphans facility that was destroyed during the riots of 1863. And that thinking leads me to believe that connecting this building with some kind of education program for Black history as part of its landmarking, even though it shouldn't be tied to it because you want to landmark it no matter what it's used for, but that might be helpful to you.
Okay, thanks, Marty. Pam, thank you for waiting patiently.
Perfectly
Thank
all
you for
right.
letting me jump you, Pam.
It's fine. Eric, just another possibility for reaching out to local groups. There is an reasonably active block association for 17th Street, which also maintains a membership with the Council of Chelsea Block Associations. That would definitely be worth reaching out to that organization, and David or I can plug you in to contacts in those two organizations. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Let me finish. I should say, Tom has my contact information. So
yeah, I can
that from
on that. Can I just add one thing about the selling of the building by Department of Sanitation? In my day, which was quite a long time ago, they used to have to go through ULURP to sell it, which is a public process that community board is engaged in. I don't know if the ULURP laws have changed, but that would, at least give the community board a heads up. But I understand the concern about giving sanitation the heads up in advance of landmarks, although landmarks will probably contact sanitation and maybe even DCAS to see if that building is needed for sanitation or could be assigned to another agency, as was the case, I believe Pamela was talking about on West 20th Street with the sanitation department being assigned, building being, and that was a section station too, being assigned to HPD, which then you guys had to fight to get the park built, which was in my minority report of the Chelsea rezoning from the late 90s.
Well, there you go. A bit of history.
Right. How about that?
Pam, are you done or?
I'm done. Thanks, Tom, for that.
You're done. Oh,
I'm done. I'm done. I'll take my hand down. Sorry.
Mike Noble.
Oh, just a brief thing. Can we get rid of the screen share?
Oh, sure. How do I do it?
Should we enter a motion?
No one's ever asked me to do that.
Well, we love looking at all of you, especially you, Eric. So let's get a full view.
So I just had one probably illiterate landmark question. If for some reason somebody wants to sell this house or this building, if it is landmarked, does it prevent it from getting sold?
No, it wouldn't prevent it from being sold.
It would not prevent it from being.
No, not if it was designated a New York City landmark. And the wonderful thing about that would be that even a private owner would not be able to demolish or alter it. Whereas if it were only listed on the state and national register, were it to end up in private hands, that private owner could demolish or alter it.
Okay, so if it was landmark, that means that if somebody else buys it, they cannot demolish it and they can't significantly alter it.
Yeah, and that alteration would have oversight of the Landmarks Commission.
Right. Okay, Viren, did you want to say something on that?
No, I was just going to say that even if it is not landmarked, city cannot simply sell it off without having to go through ULURP, so they will have to come back to us.
If it is not landmarked.
Even if it is not landmarked, city cannot simply sell it.
Oh, because it's a city-owned property. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. Okay. Are we ready to have somebody make a motion about this?
I'll make a motion for a letter to support landmark designation and ask the Landmarks Commission what the heck they're waiting for.
I second.
Oh, okay. With all, I mean, a letter that has all the reasons why it should be landmarked, which we have ample information about.
And that we would support that designation, yes.
Okay, all right, everybody's sort of nodding happily.
And I think we definitely want to mention the Landmarks Commission's equity framework.
Yes, that was a very good point. Okay, all right.
I just want to ask Eric. Eric, you mentioned college school number 3 has been landmarked. Precedents like that is helpful for us. Do you know if any other college schools have been landmarked besides number 3?
I don't believe so. I don't know for sure, but I don't think so. I remember at the time.
If you find out in the next few days, if you could just send us a quick note on that, that would be helpful for us to incorporate. Because I think precedents, and Marty, you mentioned the other sites in the district. If you have sort of a handy list of those that we could incorporate into the letter too, I think that would be helpful.
I don't have a handy list of them.
I think Lamartine.
You rattled them off very quickly though, Marty. It was very good.
Well, he rattled off Lamartine.
Lamartine, yeah, well, y'all know where that one is. That's on that's between 8th and 9th.
29th Street.
Yeah, I think the orphanage that was burned during the draft riots may not have been in Chelsea. I think it was on the block immediately north
No, that
of
was on
where,
5th Avenue and
It's on
43rd.
Fifth Avenue.
by the New York Public
No,
Library.
It's not in Chelsea at all. And the church we're talking about, I think, is 53rd or 54th Street.
It's 53rd Street, St. Benedict and More.
Right.
But it was
And I think
established in Chelsea.
And I think in the context of the
I mean,
letter,
in the village.
some background in terms of African-American community in Chelsea and in Hell's Kitchen, historically in the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, because this school was not built in a vacuum. There was a reason this school was here. Like Eric, he just mentioned the guy from the Red Caps. He lived around the corner. So there was a large African-American community in Chelsea. In the 20s, along 7th Avenue, going up towards where Penn Station was, and Hell's Kitchen. That's why the church on 53rd Street is that we're talking about. So I think that's also part of the context that should not be lost, and we should reiterate it.
Yeah, that's very valuable. Eric, do you have any particular information about the African-American community in Chelsea?
Oh, yeah, well, I know that along 15th Street, where James Williams, my subject, was born, there were a number of African Americans living and people mixed, Black and white, living in some of the buildings. There was an African American church on the next block on 15th Street as well. I'm forgetting the name of it. So all of those blocks were part of what were considered part of the Black Belt.
Okay, if you could give us a little blurb or something, as I can't write fast enough for what you just said. So if you could give us a little paragraph or something that we can put in our letter, that would strengthen it.
Sure.
Right. If there was anything in your RFE to landmarks about how this was a character defining feature of the neighborhood, perhaps you could excerpt that and we could paraphrase it or quote it in our letter.
Yeah, we have that RFP, so we can read through that too.
Okay.
I think focusing on the neighborhood is smart, but I think limiting the focus to our neighborhood would not be smart. The locations that are 54th Street and 44th Street and so on characterize the nature of the city in the previous century and the current century. And so I think that's part of as Bert was just saying, it's part of the overall framework of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and Marty, as I was saying, it's about the migratory path from the West Village through Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen, up into Harlem.
And the burning of that orphanage, you're right, it was on 44th Street near City University, was a major horrendous event during those draft riots. So that's all part of the education. If this becomes an educational institution, of Black history, and I hope it does, all of that is relevant. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Viren, did you want to add something to that?
No, I was just going to point to a website called urbanarchive.org that actually has a map that shows multiple locations for African American history in Chelsea. It's called Urban
You have a
Archive.org.
map of that?
Yes.
Okay, so could you give that to Paul and I?
Sure.
Great.
I'll email it to you.
Thanks, Karen.
That's great. So we'll just try to gather together as much, supporting evidence for that. Now, are we ready to vote? Dave gave a vote suggestion that we vote in favor to support this application.
Second.
And Viren just seconded, I think, or somebody else. Oh, somebody else. Anyway, all in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Michael, are you opposed? No, you were just.
No, I'm in favor. I'm in
Fixing your
favor.
glasses, okay. Anyone ineligible for a conflict of interest or something? No. So that's unanimous. And thank you very, very, very much, Eric.
Thank you.
And I hope we can get this going and get it on a good track. So I think that wraps up this agenda item, and we're ready to go on to our next one, which is a change of venue, the district needs and the budget requests. Paul is going to take over. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, John. All right. Many of you remember from last month's meeting that we had that there's budget fiscal year 23 budget process is going on, the statement of needs from the district. We had talked about a number of different issues that we wanted to have raised from us: resiliency, historic district funding, open streets funding, and vacant storefronts research. So in the Dropbox, you'll see I put together a spreadsheet kind of in the form that the budget task force wants us to use, so it's consistent across the board. We have 4 items in there. The first item is a repeat request from the previous years. It came more from the Hell's Kitchen land use, but Hell's Kitchen land use didn't have any other issues this cycle, so we're just incorporating it in from just general land use for the district. And that's for some resources to have better notification of improper demolitions and non-harassment for areas specifically in the special districts that we have across the district. The second, yeah.
Could your spreadsheet be put on the screen?
It could be. It's in Dropbox. Everybody can open it, but I can probably do. Can I share screen, Jesse, or do you want?
Yeah, you can. I can do it as well. Whichever one you'd like.
Why don't you? You're more proficient.
Okay.
I could do it, but if you do it, it'll show up.
Give me one moment.
And I don't know what else I have open on my computer that. The second item, while we're waiting for that to come onto the screen, I have it open on my screen, so I'll just keep reading. We had requests for the expansion of the Chelsea Historic District, as well as a study on empty storefronts. And through conversations, it really makes more sense that funding is considered part of the community district office budget. And so what we're asking for is an increase of the community boards other than personal services funding to go back to 2020 levels. That would bring in an additional 40,000. And from that 40,000, we would be able to study the expansion of the West Chelsea Historic District and do an analysis of empty storefronts. It's the way that we thought we could get some money in to kind of address those 2 needs that have come up here a couple of times. The next issue was on open restaurants, and to look into studying the impact of the change in the zoning for the open restaurants, and notably how sidewalk cafes would be impacted, and actually who, they're looking at Department of Transportation is taking over that and questioning whether or not that's actually the best place for that to be managed, which agency. And so there's some language in there for that. I suspect that that will also come through our transportation committee. So that'll probably get tweaked as it goes through the budget process. And then the final thing, and I'm now looking at the screen on the share screen, it's kind of impossible to read. So I'll just keep reading from my notes. We talked about resiliency issues, and Kit, you brought this up, and I tried to find a way to something that we have voted on in the past. One of the patterns is that for us to make a budget request is something that we have made issue of in the past and tried to raise. So in our letter on the zoning text amendment on flooding resiliency, we had said specific in that letter that we wanted to have DCP work with other agencies to kind of create or identify funding streams for property owners wanting to comply with floodproofing measures. And in our district, it's really the historic districts that are most impacted by possible flooding. So I put some language in there for that. So those are the 4 line items for now. Anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts on that? And Tina, I see your hand go up.
Sorry, the other raise hand icon's doesn't seem to be working. I was just one little thing, website, there's a typo. The other thing I was wondering if including in that website, we might include in some way, shape or form, whether or not, for empty storefronts, if, and maybe even office space, if landlords that are willing to rent below market prices and give favorable terms to BIPOC and women-owned businesses. So, if they might be able to post with oversight from the district manager's office, I think it might be able to benefit as a resource, be able to benefit both sides. It's just a suggestion that I'd like to make.
I am following you, Tina, and I think you have a great thought. I'm not quite sure where you're saying it should go, though, because the website item talks about improper demolitions and non-harassment issues. And then there's a study on empty storefronts, but that would be to fund a study. And I think as a result of the study, those issues would come out. So I'm not exactly sure how you want me to phrase that in here.
Well, that's what sparked the idea. Since there is a study and we're asking for money, sometimes studies just take so long. And since it's similar, and maybe it doesn't even go there. Maybe it just, we consider that as a board inviting people, just like we invite people to post their jobs to help the community. And so I just thought I'd mention that now because a lot of people are suffering, both small, landowners or business, landlords, as well as the people that are looking to rent spaces but can't afford market rate. So maybe we should just consider it as a board. I'm not sure where to put it.
Yeah, since we're on a budget line item discussion, I'm not sure exactly where to put that in here, but I think it is an important issue. And I think maybe what we can do is, we're in discussions about, and maybe that's why Varen's hand suddenly went up, is maybe looking into a more storefront analysis. And from that analysis, we would be able to say, landlords that have vacant storefronts could charge lower rent to various groups or BIPOC and whatnot. I think that it's an important issue, Tina, but I don't know how to put it into this budget time, this framework that we're looking at. So
I'm just saying maybe there's not a space for it here, but maybe it's something that, I'm not sure where it would go, but the board in general would be able to fast track this because their time is of the essence and a study takes time, as you know, and to get the money for the study. So I'm just putting it out there and maybe someone smarter than I has an idea of where it would go or how it would be facilitated.
I think you're right. I think it's someone smarter than me has to also figure something out. And I'd love to think that the community board could actually expedite something moving through this city. That would be a remarkable thing if we had that power.
Okay.
So Kit, do you mind if I just, Viren, were you going to address that particular topic? Kit, do you mind if I bump over to Viren, or Viren, do you have a different topic to raise?
No, it's the same thing that you just mentioned. I think we might be able to add some language that can make a stronger case, but I don't know if this is the right time to do so. But if so, we can mention that then we must find creative ways of actually putting the storefronts back to some good use, either for the community good or community facilities or amenities or some supportive sort of activities, so that it addresses two issues. One is the economic sort of impact of vacant storefronts. And the second one is safety and security of the blocks, because it's not a lot of joy walking past, shuttered storefronts. So we could try and, if you want, I would sort of put one sentence or two in there to make a larger case, but I'm not quite sure if this is the right place for it.
Yeah, I think that, again, I think Viren, and the reason, because not everybody here knows that Viren has been very aggressively looking into some storefront analysis work. It's been emailing me and Betty and Jesse about it. So we may be able to see something come from that, Tina. So hopefully we can work on that direction. So Kit.
Yeah, so separate topic on the resiliency issue that I re-brought up, I think last time we met. I've had a couple of follow-up conversations, mostly just to try to learn a little bit more myself. One with a contact who works in sustainability for the mayor's office, and one with someone who works for the Environmental Defense Fund. Their suggestions, I don't think, are ones that we can act on in this cycle. I think potentially what we already have in there is all that we have sort of a track record of having considered as a board and written letters about. But they have suggested sort of follow-up steps in terms of further conversations, further things that folks who are interested, read about and learn about. And they've both strongly suggested that we should be putting forward a study at the neighborhood or the district level that looks not specifically at flooding, but at resiliency more broadly, and the various different interventions that a geography can consider to make it less likely to be adversely impacted by the way that climate is evolving, the way we're all experiencing the planet. So it's a bit of an update and a bit of I don't have any feedback on the item that we want to put in for now, but it's something that we could potentially say we want to engage on this question over the next 6 to 8 months. When we have this conversation next year, perhaps we have a couple letters that we've written and some other things that we've talked about as a group that could be a more robust item for next year.
I would agree. And I think, Kit, as you and I have talked about, the language I have in here was specifically from the zoning text amendment on flood resiliency. And there are 4 major components of resiliency. And this was the only one I could think of that has, a very singular way of getting some dollars. But I think a study on resiliency issues across our district would be very critical. So yeah, maybe we can talk about that going forward. Pam, I think your hand was up next.
A different topic. And again, I don't know where this fits into the what's being proposed tonight, but there is a huge need for reporting, local press, local and hyperlocal press in our neighborhoods, both in Chelsea and in Hell's Kitchen. I'm not too familiar with what press happens in Hell's Kitchen, but I know that in Chelsea we have basically one online Chelsea Community News is the name of it, and it's the only thing we've got. There are a couple of local block associations that do kind of weekly reporting on what's happening on their blocks, but for real in-depth reporting with reporters hired and real lengthy researched stories about stuff in our community, it's missing, except for this one organization. I think I would like to request that some kind of funding to help sustain the existence of that local press be considered as a part of this tonight. And you figure out where to put it.
Yeah, well, that Pam, I love the idea. Again, I'm going to say the same thing I said to Tina. It's a wonderful idea. I fully support it, but the way that this particular budget process works is that these are statement of needs for the district that have come through various committees, issues that we have raised in the past, that we have said we need funding for, and that we have taken action on in the past. And so this is just our statement of district needs based on that previous activity. So to raise, we need to fund media outlets for our neighborhoods is sort of a brand new concept, not something we have discussed as a committee before, not something we have acted on as a board before. And I'm not sure that funding media resources comes out of land use either. So I want to find a different way of tackling that. So that's why I'm wondering if it would better come out of another committee, or if it would be better to come from a different source, or if there was another reason why we have addressed that as a community board in the past, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. So let me dwell on that some more.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your consideration of that, and I will be interested to hear if you come to a conclusion about what committee that should come from. That I'd like to be able to address it to that committee as well.
What about ACEs? I'm not on it, so I'm not sure, but that's what popped into my head.
Quality of life.
Well, we have quality of life as well, right?
It's more. And I think Kit, do you want to answer that one?
Let me bring it to Alan, and we can loop in Jesse and figure out if we're the right fit. We haven't historically talked about local media.
Can I make a suggestion on that? Just because there's to my knowledge, there's no funding through the city to local media outlets. I might be wrong, but there's just no, the nonprofit organizations, community organization might have newsletters and things like that. But in terms of like purely actually just press, I think we understand that that's like a slippery slope, right? If the local government is paying for local media. So I do think the board, though, I think Pam speaks to a good issue, right? And we rely on local press immensely from our board to get the word out. But I think we should think about it and talk about it, and how we can, as a board, either hold, events, forums, something about, local media, the status of local media. There's plenty of things we can do as a board that I think would be very helpful. Hopefully, that I think local media would appreciate immensely. Building connections of that kind of sort. But I just think on this particular format, it's just not gonna. There's no home for it here. And so,
I wish we could find a way. Do you remember before DNA Info went under? They were often at our meetings, very often at our land use meetings, and often wrote about the issues. And there's just such a lack of that kind of local news coverage these days. And I think a little bit of money could go a long way for what we have.
Yeah,
so I wish we could find a way of doing it.
I hear you, but I mean, that's the fundamentals of the press as being independent is not that they're not being paid by the government.
I'm not a fan of state-run media. Like, that's not.
So like
exactly.
There's no home.
We're going to be a Russian state soon.
That's not what I had in mind.
So I think we should talk about it. We can talk about it. Let's think about what we can do.
Let's think about it. And Kit, I appreciate that you're willing to bring it to Alan and talk to Ace about that. Might be a good path for us to follow.
Yeah, this is the Chelsea's version of Pravda.
All right, let's move on. Tina, you put your hand up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Jesse, for
finish
considering this. And I'm happy that it's even on the radar. That it's something we can talk about to search for ways to be able to support local press. Thank you.
All right, I think Tina, your hand was up. Or is it still up?
Yeah, no, I'm having a hard time having this cursor for some reason work on my end. So I'm not sure what's going on. There we go. Okay, sorry about that.
All right, Kit.
Thanks, Paul. I was just going to additionally add, as the child of two newspaper journalists, I would be surprised if media outlets want to take money because it does create an inescapable conflict of interest in the way that they then cover the government, which we are a part of. So fully endorse Jesse's suggestion that we think about how do we engage with local media. That is a very adorable child.
Yeah, who's the special guest?
You want to say hello? You say hi?
All right, sorry, kids, sorry for the interruption.
No, I was just going to say, like, how do we help to create space for conversations about the role of local media and smaller media outlets? How do we as a board ensure that we're helping to sort of promote the work that they are doing and ensure that information is getting shared with the community about what's going on in the community? But I do think that in addition to us not having a way that is obvious for the city to provide funds to the media, most serious media outlets also would not want to take money from us because there would be very serious ethical challenges that they would encounter.
Great. Thanks, Kit. Brad Pasquella.
Hello, Chair. A quick question. In our in our parks meeting, we discussed the budget. And the first thing we discussed was, what did the city previously fund in our last request? I'm sorry if I missed that. Was that discussed? And from our experience on that board, zero was done, and it only ever gets done if the councilman puts some money into it. So I'm just curious on, did they give us anything? Thanks, Paul.
The answer is yes. And in Dropbox, there is a spreadsheet that shows the different departments' responses to each of the line items. The reason that the first line item and the ones I presented was brought back is because they said they weren't going to fund the way that request was. So the request is phrased differently to see if we can try to get that funding in. And I don't have that spreadsheet open. That does go through each. There's an agency response to every request and then reactions to that. And I know that the reason that Hell's Kitchen Land Use doesn't have any items this year is because their items from last year did get funded. And there was one that we had requested that also got resolved. So the answer is yes, and yes, there are some that do. The ones that don't get funded are the ones that we typically put back in and keep asking for. So we'll that's why that first one is in there. All right. All right, so I'd like to entertain a motion that we take these 4 items and move them forward to the full board for consideration through the budget task force. Can I have a motion from somebody?
A motion.
I
So
second.
Kit moved, Tina seconded. Thank you. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Any present not eligible? Looks like it was unanimous. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for everybody sending me those from last month, the notes that came in that helped build this sheet up some. Appreciate it. And now we're on to old business. And Betty is going to handle the old business item.
Okay.
Mike, did your hand go up for, do you have another question, Mike, before we move on?
Oh, this would be new business. I just want to get a word in at the end.
Okay.
Is it new business or old business? We can do new business before old business.
Well, okay, let's do new business. This afternoon, and Hector Vasquez is here to.
Oh, welcome back, Hector. I didn't see you come on.
Yeah, he came in with me. We came late because we made history today. Today was the culmination of NYCHA's residents here in Chelsea having a say in what happens in the redevelopment of the projects in Fulton and Elliott houses. So after all this time, 20 months, I guess, or so, right? More than that, we finally come to agree on a developer. I'm not going to tell you who we seem to be voting for, But today, the residents did it. The resident committees did it. Review committee did it. NYCHA itself will chime in. And then on Friday, we're going to be able to make an announcement of who that developer happens to be. And I was happy to find out today that everybody else on the committee seems to be in agreement as to who it should be. So this is,
History. Historic.
It is indeed, it was history being made while you guys were talking about the Gansevoort Market business, which I wanted to be part of. So
No, we're going to talk about that now. That's the next.
No, I'll get you on YouTube. Don't worry about it. It's history. That's history. This is
no, Mike. We're talking about Gansevoort next. That's the next.
Oh, you are. Okay.
Yeah,
But look, this is the only time that I will have to put this out in public. It'll be recorded, yeah. And I can say to myself and show my son and everybody else, hey, this is the day that we all did this, right? It is unique. It is unique in the system. And by the way, so we believe, and I think Hector will not give me up on this to the authorities. NYCHA is leading our way, and the administration will more or less have to go along with us. So there you have it.
Right. Congratulations. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Hector.
Very end.
And I know that Betty and Bert and Elzora were also part of that early working group. It's been a long
don't involve, but don't call everybody in. No,
but I'm saying it was a great effort, and I'm glad that this is reaching a positive culmination. So congratulations and thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make a comment on that. Mike, it was a little premature on Friday. Decision may not be made just yet by Friday. I believe it's still in the works, but hopefully we'll hear something pretty soon in the upcoming week or so. And yeah, it was a group effort. Obviously, with Community Board 4's support and the working group, obviously, and the elected officials. So hopefully, we're gaining a lot of steam here. So hopefully, we'll be moving forward with everything. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
The next word will be a press release. Okay, so I just want to get our local word in, and the next word is a press release.
If only we had good local press to cover it in more detail, then we'd be much better off.
Right, there you go. There's the connection.
All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the next topic, please.
Okay, so old business.
I'm sorry, guys. I know I stepped away for a moment. Did we vote on the budget priorities?
Yes.
We voted unanimously on the 4 line items as presented in the spreadsheet.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good. So I'm going to give you an update on 54 9th Avenue and West 4th Street, West 14th Street, project that many of you know that we spent long hours discussing in this last spring. But I'm going to go through what's been happening, and a lot happened last week. We recently were informed by DOB that DOB had determined that the facades of the historic row houses there were unsafe and would need to be dismantled. So we were shocked. Other people were shocked as well. And on October 4th, Paul Lowell and I quickly met with DOB and LPC to understand the situation. After that, there were a series of small meetings and letters. But for the people who are rather new to the committee, just a little bit of background. In March and April, this committee reviewed a controversial application to LPC for this site, which included a tower to be constructed behind historic townhouses on 9th Avenue and West 14th. After 2 Chelsea land use meetings with many speakers and discussion, Land Use Committee voted to deny the application unless certain changes were made. The applicant did commit to the restoration of the front facades of the row houses, which we welcomed. The full board voted to reflect the committee's recommendation. Then LPC approved the project with certain modifications, and in Dropbox, you will see the August 11th, 2020 letter, report from LPC if you want to see those details. Now, in terms of recent meetings and letters, on October 4th, DOB explained that an unsafe order had to be issued for the front facades of the row houses because they had separated from the interior supports when soft demolition took place inside the buildings that resulted in an unstable condition. The facades were at risk of collapsing. DOB would start dismantling the facades in the next 2 weeks. According to DOB, the row houses' interior and exterior walls were constructed in such a way to lead to the deterioration of the facade. In addition, the buildings were not well maintained over the years. The facades will be deconstructed by hand in order to preserve as many of the original bricks as possible. The development team will need to rebuild the buildings as close to the previous LPC approvals as possible. Then, on October 8th, there was a meeting with the development team with Lowell, me, Paul, and Jesse. And the development team gave more details about this situation. They discovered that the facades were in much worse condition than expected and called 311 and DOB to report an emergency situation, a public safety concern. Just as the street-facing facades are to be dismantled, just those are to be dismantled. The outside brick wall would be removed, cleaned, and reinstalled, working closely with LPC. Bracing of the facades began immediately. The party and the back walls will remain according to the development team. There are 3 layers for the facades, including 2 backup layers, which may be replaced with new bricks. The pedestrian sidewalk access on 9th Avenue will be maintained. We asked for photos, timelines, and a 2-week look ahead plans and accounting of the bricks for reuse. The developer will submit an amendment to the certificate of appropriateness to LPC that describes the steps to be taken. After that, on October 11th, Paul and I met with several committee members, Viren, David, Pam, and Mike. We didn't want to have a whole bunch of people because it would trigger a whole committee meeting. And we wanted to get feedback from them. And that discussion helped inform an administrative letter to LPC. And all this is in the Dropbox if you want to see all these letters. So the administrative letter, dated October 12th, expressed our dismay that the soft demolition work was permitted without necessary due diligence or complete structural analysis of the conditions of the facades and other structures. We called for a thorough structural analysis to determine how the building safety work would proceed with minimal destruction of the facades. We pointed out, thanks to David, that there are several permanent solutions to retain and stabilize such facades using various steel materials. This letter urges LPC to engage in a proactive and focused partnership with the development team and DOB to follow through on the items listed on the certificate of appropriateness and to ensure remaining historic fabric of the row houses, notably the sidewalls, do not fall into the same fate, and that LPC works to preserve those components going forward. We were a little worried that LPC was being kind of laid back about this situation. Then we got on October 18th, a letter from Tavros Holding Development Team to Community Board 4. This is the last letter. Don't worry, I'm almost done. This letter explains that an repair in place strategy is not structurally viable and would endanger workers and the public. DOB ordered them to dismantle and reconstruct the street-facing facades. Photos were include of the conditions that were discovered in the buildings are attached to that letter. This is a quote from that letter. A third-party structural engineer has been engaged to design stabilization measures to provide safety during facade deconstruction and to preserve the remaining structure that is not subject to DOB's demolition order, including the historic party walls and rear facades that are preserved in accordance with the certificate of appropriateness. Currently, steel channels have been installed on all the street-facing facades to restrain the facades in the direction of the street. Shoring has been installed throughout the buildings to ensure the stability of the floors for worker access. Additional stabilization will be reviewed with LPC prior to implementation. The letter states that to be certain that the reconstruction process will produce facades identical to those approved by LPC, they have conducted 2 digital surveys. Then they give a list of activities planned for the period of October 18th through October 31st. I'm not giving you those tasks, but they're in the letter. It's in the Dropbox. Now we've received 3 other letters, one from Chelsea, Save Chelsea, one from Village Preservation, and one for Historic District Council, which identify these issues and sometimes put a different slant on them or look at it in another way. And since some people are on the committee who are part of those letters, they may want to describe them in more detail. But we wanted to be sure that we gave you as much information as possible, that we wanted to be transparent and wanted you to know that we were very startled by this situation. We had not expected this, and we are very disappointed that perhaps due diligence could have prevented this unfortunate occurrence. And it occurred, and we need to move forward in the best way possible. So I guess now we ought to take comments and questions. No comments and questions?
I see Dave's hand up.
Yeah, Betty, the letter that you received, it sounds like today. You said October 18th?
Yes.
Was that shared in the Dropbox?
Yes. It
Okay,
came late in the afternoon.
It
All right,
arrived at 4 o'clock, and in the notice that Jesse sent out to committee members, it was specifically listed. So
I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to look at that. And it sounds like this is simply the last word. Do we know that Landmarks has signed on with this and DOB, and that's the direction they're going in? There's no further discussion?
I would say that's probably correct.
I would say on the facade dismantling, it's probably moving forward as planned. As we discussed, the issue is that the Department of Building has declared it a public safety issue, and they are not willing to stop work on the dismantling because they are concerned about the public safety. I think that the concern is that LPC has not been proactive enough in preserving this building, and so that we wanted to make sure that they get their nose into it.
That was the administrative letter.
Given that the letter was added to the Dropbox so late, could I ask you to screen share it and whatever photographs are in it?
I'm not skilled enough for that. Maybe.
I can do that in a second, David, if you just give me one moment. I'm just answering Andrew Berman. Andrew Berman is also in the attendees. He would like to speak. His hand is raised, but give me
I'd
one
like to
moment.
hear from Andrew.
I can set that up as well if that's something that you guys want to do.
Yeah.
You know, I do have to say, you know, you've heard us talk about what happened with the oldest house in Chelsea to death, but the new owner there turned himself into the Department of Buildings. He basically complained about the structural condition of his own buildings, which brought the Department of Buildings to come and visit. They issued an order calling for emergency shoring, just like happened here. And, you know, when you turn it over to the Department of Buildings, they may act out of an abundance of caution, and all of a sudden it's a life safety issue. But I really think we want to know what the condition of these buildings is, how bad it is, and make sure that a precedent isn't created for anybody who wants to develop an old building to simply say to the Department of Buildings, look, I think I've got an unstable condition here. Come out and take a look at it. And if DOB is not going to be imaginative or resourceful, and they are a city bureaucracy after all, then they may simply say, well, it all has to come down. And, you know, how many of our landmark buildings would be eligible for this treatment going forward? I think we really need to hold landmarks to account. You know, this is a city where you can restore anything, and almost any historic building is going to have structural issues. The fact that they're saying nothing can be done and that all has to come down, it just does not ring true to me. I'm deeply suspicious, and I think the rest of the public is going to be suspicious, and it doesn't serve landmarks or the Department of Buildings well to have the kind of cynicism that's out there right now. So,
and David, and I will point out what you just said, they're going to take it all down. And one of the things that we're really stressing is that they don't take it all down. They're going to take down the facade, but I'm still pushing for the demising wall and party walls, those still historic fabric that represent the model of the row houses, that LPC does not let that happen. I mean, I think that the facades coming down is a shame, but to your point, we're really trying to hold LPC's toe to the fire here on every other historic piece of those row houses.
Yeah, but I want more than that, Paul. I don't think we should give up on the facades just to save the sidewalls. You know, we don't even know whether the soft demolition caused or simply exposed the so-called structural defects that are insurmountable.
That's true, we don't know.
Maybe this would be a good time to look at the photos that came. Jesse, can you share that? So this is the letter.
One second, let me see if I can just move this over so I can.
Yeah, you're scrolling down, that looks good.
Yeah, if you scroll, I think if you scroll down. I don't know. Is there a caption under it? Yeah, I think there's a caption.
You will see that. Is that?
Yep. That's the 14th Street side, right?
Okay, you could keep going. There's about 4 or 5 photos.
Can we hold on that image for a minute? Just, I want, and the description of where it is.
So it said the 14th Street building, 4th floor street facade. The facade is separated from the party wall and bricks are sheared.
So they say. I'm sorry, you can keep going.
And again, if it's easier for people to see on their own rather than this, open your Dropbox link and you can see these photos on your own computer, if it's easier. Keep scrolling a little bit more. Just, that's the 14th Street building, 3rd floor. The snap joists with improper sistering and the shoring has been installed there.
That's all interior structure that was intended to be demolished in any case.
Yeah, I agree. Now, what is that's the brick delamination failure at 14th Street building. And you can see that is you can see in that corner that's looking out the window at 14th Street. You can see that brick delamination failure right there. So keep going, Jesse. That one shows the separation from the party wall and the failed bricks.
No, sorry.
Keep going. I can't read this a little more yet. That's the 9th Avenue building, the facade shearing from the party wall and delaminated bricks.
These past three photos were all second floor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. Tui is good point. It's all second floor that was showing us. That's the facade separating from the party wall. Missing bricks. It looks like it's short up there too. It looks like they have metal braces in there to hold that in. And again, you can see that you're looking out the window there, so you can see that that's the facade wall. So one more, Jesse. I think there's maybe one or two more. And again, I'm not a structural engineer myself, so I look at these and I see failing bricks. That's all I can't make a professional assessment of this. I just look at what these pictures show. It's displaced towards the street there. And the next one down, I think there's one more, Jesse. That's the missing brick, and backup brick has been delaminated. And that's a third floor tweet.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I'm not saying and again, I'm not saying that I necessarily say these photos prove anything one way or the other. That's what they provided us, right? So.
I mean, it's hard to know whether these are typical conditions or the worst cases that they picked out. I will say that promotional material on historic preservation often shows conditions like this as the before image and a before and after example where the after looks just fine. Without having examined it myself, I can't really say. It certainly helps to have pictures like this, and it would help to have a comprehensive structural analysis that might dissuade other owners of buildings from trying to get their buildings condemned for their own convenience. To have, this be a documented example and precedent of what the bar is for being able to do that. I'll let others speak now, and I would like to hear from Andrew Berman if he's here as well.
Well, why don't we just give our committee members a chance and then get to Andrew. Kit?
Yeah, thanks, Betty. Paul, you and I share the resume line of not a structural engineer, but you do work in real estate. And so I have a question that you may or may not be able to answer. I'm curious about what something like this does to the value of a development of this type. I know there aren't a million of them, so maybe precedent is tricky here, but I would think that part of the value proposition in a building like this one is the fact that it has significant components that are historic. And so I guess it's a question trying to sort of understand where are the incentives for the developer here. Does this, in Paul and anyone else who has an opinion on it, meaningfully impact the actual price that space in this building can ultimately command if the facade has to be completely replaced, and it's therefore no longer nearly as sort of historically and architecturally significant a structure when it's redeveloped?
Yeah, I don't have.
See, that's beyond our skill set.
I don't. Yeah, I don't have a professional opinion on that, and the value of historic versus non-historic commercial office space. I just don't. You know, my issue is really just making sure that we try to continue to preserve as much of the remaining historic fabric as is possible going forward.
Okay. Yeah, no, that question was just coming from a place of sometimes comments are made that seem to assume the absolute worst of developers' intentions in all cases. And I just actually wonder if they have a financial incentive to preserve. And maybe there's no way to answer that, but they proposed developing in a way that was supposed to maintain this facade. And they're not talking about going in a wildly different direction with their plans, at least not yet. And so I'm very curious how they feel about this evolution of the situation.
I would just say again, perhaps naively, that they're having to spend a lot more money than they intended to by doing all this shoring up and everything. Again, that may be naive, and I do believe that they did not intend this, and that I don't believe they're trying to do a trick on the community. I think they honestly found these conditions that they had not expected. At least that's what they said. They had not expected this at all. And now, again, maybe that's their cover story. I don't know, but that's the impression I get. They were not engineering it this way. But anyway.
And I will add to that, Betty, based on the meetings we had with DOB and LPC and the developers, you know, my cynicism runs pretty strong with all three of them. You know, I have worked with a lot of developers, and I have the cynicism against them. LPC, you know, we've had a history of challenges with them and not necessarily addressing our historic concerns in this district. So I go into all those meetings with a bit of cynicism towards all of them. And I would say that the developer was probably the one who seemed most committed to doing as much preservation on site as possible, more so than LPC, which doesn't surprise some of you, but does surprise me a little bit. And the person from DOB who's assigned to this project, and David, you're the one who pointed out in one of our meetings, that he's one of the strongest preservationists at DOB. So I do feel like they are on a pretty honest and straightforward path here.
I can't vouch for him as a preservationist, but he is known for being their chief sort of enforcement person, and is known as being a pretty straight person, you know,
yes,
a reliable person.
But I'm just echoing Betty's perspective that it doesn't feel to us that there's some sort of subterfuge going on here, that there was an effort to sabotage in any way. And Kit, I think that, as Betty points out, they're going to have to spend a lot more money now than they had originally planned to, but they steadfastly remain committed to the certificate of appropriateness in both verbal communication and written communication with us. So I feel pretty confident about that.
It's helpful because it's sort of a different version in terms of answer to the question I asked, of sort of like, what is their financial motivation given what's transpired? And it sounds like they financially now have to take on costs that they hadn't anticipated incurring, which has the same effect net as the question that I originally asked, if that makes sense.
Different side of it. Pam?
Oh, boy. I'm sorry. It seems I'm more cynical than any of you. I was not at all surprised by this news. I rather expected it, given the history of this type of project. I would like to just pause right there and ask if the chairs would consider allowing Andrew Berman to speak before I go any further with my comments. I think
we're gonna let committee members speak first. It's the way we always run things, Pam. Let the committee members speak first.
Okay.
And we'll let the public in. He's not a member of the committee. He's not a member of the community. So he'll give it a chance to speak. All right. So let's let the committee members go first.
I'm sure he will. It just might cover some subjects that we might just be kind of wandering around confused the
Yeah, well,
audience.
don't
I
worry.
think that's okay.
That's okay.
That's all right. I just thought that we might want to consider treating him like he was an elected official or something, or the rep of an elected official. Sorry, Andrew.
Do you want to?
Okay, yes, I'm going to continue.
Later again if you want.
No, I will, thank you. I spent 35 years as a manager of properties that look pretty much like that when those 9 do. And I had a lot of experience looking at their guts from every angle. I did not, looking at those photographs, see anything that struck me as not possible to cure, to repair, to do masonry work that would suffice to keep that building standing. I frankly don't think that those, what we are calling party walls, I'm not at all sure they're party walls. I think they are actually, each of those buildings had its own side wall, and the next building was built against that. Calling it a party wall is a misnomer. Further, I didn't see anything, looking as closely as I was able at those photographs, to see anything that indicated that they were ever tied to the front facades, but that the front facades were always somewhat freestanding from the party, I shouldn't call them party walls, the sidewalls. Some of those walls may be party walls, particularly on the 9th Avenue side, but from what I can tell, the 14th Street buildings have individual separate walls. And I say that because there are actually some photographs in the original proposal from the architects that of the street, the 14th Street facing facades, that show the straight up and down line on the facade, which is the telltale indication that there are 2 separate walls. If not, you would see the bricks woven, tied together, lapping across the faces of the different buildings. You don't see that on 14th Street. So I think that is the case. I think that the facade walls were actually built freestanding from the interior structural walls, that they were not structural to the facades. Facades are basically curtain walls, and all they're ever asked to hold up is the windows and the cornice and the roof rafters. They're not meant to hold the building up. In inspecting as much as we were able to, once the scaffolding and stuff is in the way, to see if you can see just any indication on those facades that they are failing, you don't see it. It's just not there. It doesn't appear to bulge. You can take sight lines along and see it's not bulging. I'm just very cynical about all of this, and I don't understand why there isn't much more conversation about restoring those existing walls. I don't think it's that much. I'd like to see an analysis of the difference in cost between doing the appropriate masonry work to rescue those facades and taking them down and starting all over again and rebuilding them. I suspect it's kind of the same. I don't know. And I of course should say, I'm not an architect, I'm not an engineer, I'm just somebody who's old enough to have had a ton of experiences with buildings that look exactly like these buildings.
I'm going to shut up. Betty, before you go on, Pam, I appreciate the learning the distinction between sidewall and party wall. What is a demising wall? What is the?
Demising just means it separates 2 buildings.
But is a demising wall a party wall or a side wall?
It can be either one.
Okay, because
it's just the wall, whatever exists that separates 2 buildings is the demising wall.
I see. Okay, because we did use
why are you asking me this? We have architects here.
Well, you raised the point, so I'm asking you because you raised it as an issue. Right. So I'm asking you because we do use the words. We have used the words interchangeably in our own letter, and then the LPC certificate of appropriateness uses the word demising wall. So I want to follow up on that issue you raised.
Well, party wall is has a very specific meaning. Party wall. Usually,
wall,
like the Cushman row, those houses have party walls. You can look at the face of them and they're all neatly tied together, as I described, the way the bricks overlap and the division between different buildings. When you get to the first house, the oldest house in Chelsea, that wall is freestanding. It's a separate wall. It's its own bearing wall, and the house built next to it is its own bearing wall because they were built at different times. Those
that's good for me to know.
A lot of the explanation of that. Viren, help! You guys. I'm not the architect here.
You actually clarified. I think that's the sort of key issue here. These were row houses, and a lot changed behind the facade walls, and that has created the condition for the facades to not be able to stand on their own. So, going back and look at this, it's extremely important to keep in mind that these were row houses. And unlike the last example that Pam described, they were not demising walls, meaning, each row house had its own brick wall, and there were two walls side by side. That didn't happen here because they were built at the same time. So there was a single wall between the two row houses. Correct me if I'm wrong, David.
Right, a party wall is kind of like a party line where your old telephone line was shared with someone else. It's a single entity that supports the floor joists on both sides. And it's my understanding that the facades were often built independently, perhaps after the party walls were built. And if you look at those photos, you see some bricks, they look like half bricks, right where the party wall meets the back of the facade. And those bricks look jagged, as if they could have sheared off. But they were very likely, because they were going to be concealed, simply crudely broken in half to finish the wall. And I'm not seeing their sort of matching half with a jagged edge in the facade. The facade looks to me in those photos like it's passing right past the party wall. But even, almost regardless of that, even if they had sheared off, there are ways of reattaching the facade to those party walls and consolidating them. It's a problem that's probably been solved for a very long time. And, as I said before, without getting too down in the weeds, you drill a hole through the facade, several feet into the party wall, you insert a reinforcing rod and you pressure inject epoxy around it, and it ties everything back together.
Well, and so I walked by today, and that's what it looks like they did on the exterior. They have steel beams with big, huge lug nuts that run through. They have a massive beam, probably 8 or 10 inches tall, running strapped across the entire length of the facade with massive bolts that are drilling into the building. And again, I don't know what that actually means or what they actually did, whether they used epoxy or not. I don't know if the party walls or side walls originally, like in the 1840s and 50s when this was built, were those side walls or party walls? I just don't know.
Well, I think some of that is so.
With an engineer's study, we should be able to have the answers to all of these questions. If that has happened or is happening or going to happen, as an in-depth engineering study of this. All I was hoping for was that there could be a halt to the stop work order to the demolition of these buildings until all of this can be further researched. I think there has been some outreach to some of our public officials who may be actively approaching DOB for something of that sort. Do we have any information about that?
I think that what we can do as a board and what we can do tonight as a committee is to say that we want to send a letter issuing a stop work order. That will then go to full board, and then that will go out. But my concern is that it's 2 weeks. By then it's done, right? So what I'd like to do is look at some sort of solutions of what we can do going forward.
Let's hear from Viren. He's been very patient.
No, I just want to make a couple of larger points. I mean, one of the things that we are in this situation right now is, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. How long this developer actually owned these buildings before he put the proposal together? Multiple years, right? Why did he not actually maintain or do the necessary sort of work that could have protected these buildings and the facades particularly? He's been sitting on it. So to David's point, I can buy a landmark property, sit on it for 5-7 years, let it sort of, die its own slow death, and then put up for demolition. Right. So, so this is a larger point, Paul. So I'm not saying that is what is happening here necessarily, but this could set the precedent that, okay, this is how we can actually put in place a mechanism to bring down landmark buildings. That's number one. Number two, landmark, it has basically declared a bankruptcy of sorts. They should be taking lead on this. They basically have handed it over to DOB, and that's problematic. They should have their own internal sort of unit that needs to sort of monitor many of these landmark properties across the city, so that a situation like this doesn't come about. There is no mechanism. There's nothing. A building is landmarked. No one has no agency goes out there, checks the conditions of the buildings. So there's no funding for it. There's no mechanism in place for it. And the other large issue that I actually have raised previously is when we have row houses like this, and if they are landmarked, I think they should be landmarked along with the fabric. What I mean by the fabric is actually block and lot configuration. They should not be allowed to be consolidated into one single lot, which is why this developer can actually build a taller building at the back, because now it's being turned into a super block, and therefore all the other sort of requirements are thrown out of the window. But if they had, we should also include, maybe this is not the time for it, but there should be a larger conversation about how does the LPC look at such landmark properties along with the fabric on which it sits. So
I think that's a good point, Vera. I'm not sure if this is the time for it exactly, but monitoring particularly fragile landmark buildings, and that, and keeping track over time sounds like a great idea to help prevent unscrupulous owners from purposely neglecting them. I think that is a great point. I don't know what we do with it exactly in our letter, if we're writing a letter on this, but.
And if Landmarks and DOB said, no way, you got to fix it. It's yours, you got to fix it. That would send out a warning to owners to take care of their buildings.
Well, and Vera, to address your points, Vera, I will say, and Betty and Jesse could verify this, is that when the owners start to blame previous owners for the destruction of those buildings and the age and the deterioration, I interrupted him and said, no, you've owned these buildings long enough that you are responsible for this yourself. So I did call him out on that very pointedly. And then in terms of LPC taking the back seat, I think that's really the thrust of what we're trying to get at here, is that LPC has taken a back seat and we need them to be on the front seat. They need to be driving this project and not waiting for bad news to come out and then have further deterioration of the project.
Yeah, we're very.
And how do we go about that? How do we have any effect on that? How do we get them to get in the front seat? What is there that we can do as a community board to push that? Because that's the essence of this. There's no guts there. Sorry.
That's true. No, that's true. And now, is there anyone?
And that's it's been true for a very long time. I've been on the board for 10, 12 years. It's been the case right from the get-go and long before I got on the board, through many different commissioners. Sorry.
Let's just go back to the committee before we go to the public. Are there any other committee members that want to have a question or a comment? I see nobody else. Okay. So Paul, do you want to bring in how many?
Yes, so Hector just raised his hand. Let's hear from Hector, but then in the meantime, Jesse, can you bring over Andrew and Zach? Andrew Berman and Zach Weinstein are both raising their hands in the public. So Hector, go ahead.
Hi. I haven't been on the CB4 for as long as some of you. So, but from what I've seen and some of the comments I've heard, I mean, it seems Landmarks Commission is, as you said, has been taking a backseat on a lot of projects. a lot of overseeing a lot of the landmarks. Is there any way that maybe at this point we should take a stance and try to craft a letter? I don't know, who would we send it to actually at this point to say, hey, what kind of precedents are we setting here when a very organization that's been tasked to preserve the history of our properties here in the city are not really up to task or haven't been for a while? I mean, is it wise to I don't know, craft such a strong letter like that, or will we be stepping on too many toes? I mean, I'm really
I'm not
hearing
afraid to
this
step on toes.
repeated theme. I've heard this repeated theme over and over again, and honestly, it's aggravating, to be honest with you, because as you said, a developer may just purchase a property. An owner could sit on it for as many years, let it get dilapidated to the point where, hey, they can just say, well, we can't fix it because, you know, it's been neglected all this time. We have to do something more drastic and get away with these super high rises like they're trying to do on 14th Street.
So why don't we see how we keep going? Thank you, Hector.
Okay.
So it looks like Peggy and Carrie have raised their hands too, Betty. Should we call them first?
Oh, okay. Who is it?
Carrie and Peggy.
Oh, Carrie.
Just have a quick question. I know that, you know, we will run out of time and it won't help, but is it worth it to write that letter anyway? So that, you know, at least we have on record that we're really upset about this, that it's not okay. They should stop construction. I mean, I fully understand that we have to wait for full board and all that. And in the meantime, this is not, you know, going to stop anything, but I still think we need to take some kind of stand. Just putting it out there. Because otherwise it just will, you know, it just happens all the time.
Well, I think as I understand it, that the safety issue, at least the way DOP places it and LPC responds, has to be addressed before. That's like an emergency safety thing. Then it's a question of how do they proceed after that. So maybe there's some way we can craft, you know, stop after the safety issue is addressed.
I mean, out those windows, I saw tons of scaffolding. I don't know if that does it, or a net or whatever, but perhaps they can just put up the safety measures and stop.
Okay. Thank you. Peggy?
Of course they can.
Peggy?
I'm okay. Apologies. Sorry. Thank
What?
Okay. Thanks. Sorry.
Wait, so you don't have a question?
Sorry. Right. No question or comment.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I think we've exhausted committee members. So on to Andrew.
Thanks very much. I want to echo some of the comments made by Pam and David and Viren and Carrie. First of all, I want to say I'm glad to hear that the community board has had some level of communication from the Department of Buildings. We and others have had none, in spite of repeated attempts to reach them and to get answers to some of these questions. Some of the things that the Department of Buildings has been saying to you and saying in the press contradicts what we've been told by the Landmarks Preservation Commission. So there's a lack of clarity here about exactly what it is that's been going on. You know, I can't look at those pictures and say these buildings are structurally sound. I certainly can't look at those pictures and say these buildings are not structurally sound and, you know, the facades need to be dismantled. I also can't tell you what's in the heart of the developers, but there's a few issues that I think are important just to emphasize. One is that there was no reported signs of stress to these buildings before this happened. And it's incredibly unusual for 9 buildings to be in danger of falling down and nobody heard creaks, nobody saw cracks, nobody saw sways. You know, that's very, very unusual. I will also say that after this order was issued, that the buildings were unsafe, I went by and found that one of the buildings was unlocked, open to the public, accessible, which runs quite contrary to the idea that it was unsafe and there was imminent danger. It was reported to me by a reliable source that also during this time period, somebody else went in the building to see what was going on because it was unsecured and unlocked, and found a dozen workers casually eating lunch in the middle of the day in the building, in this building that supposedly there's an imminent danger of some sort of collapse. It's important to keep in mind that this developer, even knowing the landmark restrictions for the site, did originally ask for and seek a much greater level of demolition of these buildings than they were ultimately granted, and certainly wanted a much larger building to be built behind them than they were also originally granted. It's very clear that it was in the economic interests of this developer. It would have been better for the developer if these 9 buildings weren't in the way and they could have just built the tower that they were seeking to build behind it. We have asked the Department of Buildings repeatedly for clarification about the issue of whether or not these structural issues were discovered by the demolition work or were partly caused by the demolition work, and we've not gotten an answer. You would think if there was a clear answer to that question that no, it had nothing to do with there was no causal relationship between that and the work that was being done, that answer would be provided fairly readily rather. I would also just say that this very vague verbal promise that they will try to reuse as many of the bricks as possible, we've heard this before. It is not worth the paper it's written on. I'm not saying that means that therefore automatically no bricks will be reused, but that is as broad and open-ended of a quote unquote promise as you can offer. It really guarantees little, if not nothing. And as has been pointed out before, if these conditions did previously exist, it's not like they just took possession of the buildings yesterday. Some serious questions need to be answered here as to why, if these conditions previously existed, they weren't discovered previously, especially given the degree of work that was contemplated and approved for these buildings. I mean, even if everything went according to plan, they were supposed to be deconstructing a fairly significant portion of these buildings. If such work was supposed to take place and was approved by DOB and LPC, why was there not an investigation before those approvals were granted as to whether or not these buildings could actually handle that kind of work, which apparently they could not. So those are my comments.
Okay, a lot of meat on that bone. Thank you. Now we have Zach.
Hello. Yes, hi. Is my microphone working?
Yes, it is.
It is, great. Yeah, my name is Zach Weinstein. I was co-founder of Save Gansevoort and have been very involved in a lot of landmark and preservation battles in the meat market on the CB2 side of the fence. I'm not an architect, I'm not an engineer. I can't speak to the possibilities for salvaging the buildings and how one could best proceed to try and protect what we have. What I am very concerned about, however, is trying to get an understanding of what led us to this current situation and what can be done to make sure that this does not happen again. It seems to me that at a bare minimum, the developer was guilty of gross negligence in this situation. They either proceeded with a massive engineering project without doing adequate inspections of the existing structures beforehand, or they possibly ignored the results of inspections which they got that indicated that these buildings could not survive the planned work. I would disagree with what some of the committee members said, that there's no economic incentive for a developer to do this and that it's costing them more money because now the work's more complicated. The incentive would have been or could have been that the developer was proceeding with work, that a valuable conversion project that these buildings were simply not capable of withstanding. And had that been said upfront to the LPC, and had it been clear in advance that complete demolition of these structures was necessary in order to complete this project, I doubt even the current LPC would have approved it. What I've been playing with in my own mind, and I don't know what the legal basis for doing this would be, but if these buildings are destroyed, if they're demolished, and let's not use words like deconstructed, if these buildings are destroyed, there needs to be a significant penalty. And it seems to me that this would be a situation in which the developer defaulted on his obligation under the landmarks application that he made, and that therefore that application should be declared void. They should start over again. They should rebuild the dam structures to the best of their ability, and they should walk away. They should not have the privilege of building a massive tower and profiting massively from a site which they themselves have destroyed, and incidentally, which is referred to in their own website as iconic and irreplaceable. That's the situation we're now in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. More discussion?
So,
Tina,
you haven't spoken yet.
I think we deserve to see, and the community deserves to see a report, an engineer's report, both before any work was done, shooting the heights and so forth and so on, and a current report, an engineer's report, explaining the current situation and what transpired before construction took place and now. And I bring that up because, as some of you may know, I live in a 7-story tall, circa 1910 brick basket weave building that was severely damaged twice. One due to faulty underpinning by the developers next door, which then precipitated DOB ordering the developer to put up cross-lock bracing. And we had probably 20 I-beams going back and forth to make sure our building did not fall over. The other thing that happened was our entire basement ceiling was on the verge of total collapse. And in both situations, we had engineers' reports, both before and after. In the first situation, when we knew construction was going to take place, we're only a 6-unit building, and we made sure we had everything documented before construction took place. So DOB came in, cross-lock bracing, when our first floor or basement ceiling was on the verge of total collapse. DOB came in right away, and it looked like a forest in our basement because of the board's negligence, to be quite honest. And they can sue me if they see this on YouTube. So I have a little experience with this sort of thing. I know that with the proper engineering remediation, a lot can happen. However, the owner, in this case, the developer, needs to be patient. And I just don't understand why we don't see 2 engineers' reports detailed, not just an opinion, as well as why a stop work order can't be issued for a prolonged period of time until an analysis is made. And that is a question that I would like to pose to the developer.
Thank you, Tina. Spoken out of deep experience.
And pain.
And pain. Pam, did you want to add something? Yeah, I see your hand up.
I see Marty's hand up too.
So let Marty go. I've already had one shot at but I'll get a second bite at the apple, will I not?
Sure.
Let Marty talk.
Eating apples. Thank you. I hid my comments with, we don't have enough information. The experts on our committee who have, I mean, I identify two architects and Varen and David, and I identify a long experienced person who has her own OJT knowledge, that's Pam. None of them have been hired to look at this from any technical point of view, so they don't have the information either. It's not clear to me from what I've heard whether these facades are in imminent danger of falling down and whether they need to be taken down or not. Therefore, I agree with those folks who have said a stop work order should happen, and we should be getting an examination from an engineer. That raises questions: who's the engineer and who pays for the engineer? I certainly don't think that a letter that we write should wait for the full board meeting. I think it should be written on an emergency basis for ratification by the board, and that whatever process to get examination to get technical examination of the facts of this issue should occur soon, and we should encourage it to occur soon, even though we don't have any power to do any of that. We should get a letter out. We should figure out how to get it out immediately. Anything short of doing it immediately is just permitting the wall to be taken down.
Thank you, Marty. And who would the letter go to exactly?
Well, who would issue a stop work order?
No, DOB.
That's Melanie.
DOB. Thank you.
I think there should be a letter written to DOB saying stop work order, and there should be a process. I don't know what that process is to identify independent examination of these walls. I mean, Pam is talking about interlacing and not, it's out of my wheelhouse. What you're saying makes sense. How can we make a decision on information that isn't carefully examined? So the letter should also try to identify who would examine, how we examine. Are we going to have the developer hire their own engineer, and would we trust that? Probably needs to be independent. How do we identify an independent engineer and who pays for it? I can't answer those questions, but we need to move in that direction.
Thanks, Marty. I see Pam looks like she's happy with that idea.
Well, I think, thank you, Marty. Yes, there should be an independent engineer study being done. I think that the letter goes to DOB and is copied to the mayor and the city council and every other agency in the city should be alerted to the fact that CB4 considers this an emergency request. On a slightly different thing, just based on my feeling that this developer, who may have his heart may be in more or less the right place, but it was very naive going into this whole thing, as kind of we were. But one of the reasons I think that is because one of the points that they were making about how difficult it would be to salvage brick, they pointed out that the 9th Avenue facades are stuccoed, that the 14th Street buildings are painted on brick, which is pretty easy to clean off, but the 9th Avenue facades are stuccoed, and that would mean the bricks would have to be hand cleaned one at a time to remove the stucco. But in one of their own photographs, it clearly shows that the stucco is adhered to mesh anchored on top of wood lath, which is then anchored to the brick. So the stucco isn't on the brick. The stucco is on the backup material for the stucco, which is attached to the lathing, the lath strips, which could very easily be removed and in fact would just about fall off with a little encouragement. So that was a bogus discussion about how the bricks would be so hard to salvage because the mortar would be stuck directly on them. Not the case. So that alone tells me that they weren't very thorough in their investigations of the actual conditions of these buildings. I think they had a presumption that they would be able to do this development that was partly as of right. And I'm also interested in something that Andy, no, I guess it was, where is he?
Yeah.
Mentioned that in the process of putting this thing all back together again, those facades are going to wait until the last thing that happens. They're going to build that tower because they will suddenly have wonderful access right through the non-existent facades of the buildings with their building materials, instead of having to go the tortuous route that was described to us in our walkthroughs with them. It'll just be a big open barn door. They can just bring all their materials in that way. So there's another thing. This is just too damn convenient for my taste. I've said enough.
Okay, I think between Paul and I, maybe we could make kind of a list or summary of a potential letter.
Well, Betty, can I pick up on what Marty raised? And Jesse, you can help clarify this. I wonder if we do an emergency stop work order letter, that we can bring it to the executive committee next week, and then have at least a stop work order letter stated, put out on the record. Executive committee could approve that. We could bring that to the board for ratification. It's a challenge, but I'm wondering if that's a path we could take. And the other side is that we could write the full letter for full board approval, recognizing that a stop work order will be, that letter will be too late for them to actually stop doing the work. But Marty, your strategy, I'm trying to think if there's a way that we can actually accomplish that. And again, my focus is on what can we do going forward. And the questions that we've discussed tonight about LPC not having teeth, not having the wherewithal to do things, not to take action when necessary, those are bigger issues that still need to be addressed. And there may be some other strategies around that. And my other thoughts on stop work orders is because the community board is, restricted based on our procedures of full, committee discussions, board discussions, whatever. Elected officials have a better opportunity to make those statements than we do. So maybe individuals can contact elected officials, just urge them to do that, because they may have more power to issue a stop order than we do.
Well, I make a motion that we do write that letter. Okay.
Can I just raise
Jesse,
something?
I want to hear Jesse's thoughts on that before we do that, Mike. That's all right. Just can we do that?
Well, you guys know, I mean, based off of the necessity of the urgency of the issue, you guys can get the letter out as quickly as possible, and it would be ratified later, and you would have to give an explanation as to the reasoning why you needed to get the letter out without the normal procedure. Of course, obviously that, there's always a slight chance that the board or executive committee would disagree with you and say, no, that was it's not a good idea. And we disagree and send another letter saying we don't agree with that first letter, but that's rarely happened. So you guys can get it out as soon as you want to get it out. I'll just say this though, about the stop work order. I think, and I certainly don't have the answer to this, and that's why I ask you. You're asking an agency to issue a stop work order to a public safety public safety issue that they themselves declared as the issue, right? So you have to have findings for that stop work order. This is not about preservation, in my opinion. I'm sorry. Like, if you're asking a stop work order for it, you have to have the reason why you're asking for it, and why and explain to them why the Department of Buildings, who are the enforcing agency, is wrong in what they declared as being an unsafe building, and needs to come down immediately. So that's to me is the hurdle that with the asking for the stop work order. And I'm not trying to say no, I'm just trying to say I don't have that answer. So you would need to provide that in that letter to DOB to say, we certainly have asked for stop work orders in the past, when it's, you know, you know, when they're illegally demoing something that shouldn't be demoed, and there's the findings of the zoning resolution that we quote. So I think we have to literally, you would have to have that kind of sort of ammunition, unless I'm wrong, but like in terms from a Department of Building standpoint, you're asking them to reverse a public safety decision from their perspective. So,
I get your point, Jesse, on that. I have some reservations too about that. I mean, another modification, which maybe nobody would like, is that once the safety is secured, then stop work.
Well, I think
they've done that.
No, I think that, and Jess, I think you're verbalizing the struggle I'm having, right? We're saying to DOB, stop work on an order that you had issued, which is kind of a challenge. But I think that, you know, the points that were raised is there's a certain lack of information. And if DOB can produce the reports that show that it is in fact a public safety hazard, you know, we've asked for reports from the structural engineers, and we haven't seen them yet. But, you know, we could at least say, you know, produce these reports as part of the order, like stop work now and do this analysis. And if they have the reports to show that this is a public safety issue, then they should be able to just produce those reports for us. So maybe that's how we incorporate that language.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just raising that point. I mean, I just, you know, I do think the other things about what needs to change at LPC is, to me, really important. What David has been talking about for a while, and Pam has referenced here tonight, and the bigger issue. I do think, looking forward into 2022, we should talk to our electeds about legislation that provides, you know, LPC more, you know, guidance, whatever we want to call it, tools in their toolbox, you know, enforcing ability to really get, you know, on top of projects like this. Because I do think that that's a policy, that's legislation that needs to pass. And so I do think that is something proactively, you know, I know it seems reactive in this particular incident, it's not going to solve this one, but I do think it's something that we've seen routinely, you know, and you guys are constantly stuck in a very awkward position when a new site comes up, whatever it may be, next one, and they're promising everything to that it's all going to be great. You know, I mean, you know, how much more due diligence can a volunteer board like yourselves do in a committee meeting when you're asking the questions to these developers and they're telling you everything's going to be fine? And, you know, so someone should be making sure that that's actually accurate, you know, that they've done the engineering reports, they've done the deep dive, that their plan actually is going to make sense, and the building can handle what they're planning to do. And so.
I just want to jump in here in answer to Marty's earlier question, who's going to pay for it? Really, the developer. And in terms of being impartial, an engineer could lose his or her license for a fraudulent, inaccurate report. So that's one thing. It's always paid for by the developer. So I would say in the future, we should, before we even opine on anything, before the person even comes to us and appears before this committee or any other, that they submit a thorough and detailed engineer's reports from a structural engineer. That should go without saying, and we should require it for reading and review before even hearing or listening to anybody's case. And I don't know what the rush by the DOB is. That site has been in that condition for a long time, or the developers people created an unstable situation. Again, going back to my building, when we were almost falling over by 9 feet. Do you know how long it took them to do the cross lot bracing? I mean, 9 inches to do the cross lot bracing? 6 months. So why, what took so long? They had a stop work order next door. So what I'm saying is, I think we can write a polite letter to DOB and make sure we have this protocol set in place ahead of time. Because I find the whole thing, and I don't want to impugn the developers, but I find the whole thing dangerous from start to finish. And if these are experienced developers, they know all this stuff, especially with an old brick building.
Right, and to your point, I think DOB should require this report up front. When they went in for the proposed plans, DOB should require that, have you done the due diligence? Have you got the structural report for the conditions of the existing buildings and the facades? These are landmark buildings. The mechanism is in place, but DOB actually failed, unless they have got some reports and we don't know anything about. But if they didn't get those reports, then they failed as well for requiring the developer to submit those reports.
Guys, let's stay in order of hands raised if we could, please. Thank you. Kit, you're up next, Kit.
Certainly.
Thanks, Paul. So many people are making very good points. I have several potential questions, but Paul and Betty, I think at this point it'd be helpful to just rehear what are we actually considering supporting? Because depending on what that is, my questions might be different.
I don't think we have a resolution yet, so ask away.
Okay. I may have more questions later, but my current question is just to make sure that I'm tracking the conversation. What I believe has been suggested is that we would say to DOB, we want you to reverse the decision that you've made, that this is a public safety emergency, issue a stop work order, and then there's been a couple of different suggestions about what would happen next. Tina just said the developer would be responsible for making sure that the proper engineering study and reporting is produced. Marty suggested that an independent entity should be required to do that. I'm curious if there's a mechanism and a funding solution for that sort of route. Sort of another question that I have is there a risk or a possibility that the DOB is basically going to say, well, we did the analysis what resulted in our decision that this is a public safety emergency. And so that's why we took the measures that we did. And all of this will have been, unfortunately, a bit circular. And so I don't know how many of those questions you want to tackle, but I'm not even clear what we're discussing at this point.
Well, to answer your last point first, right? I think that what DOB said to us in our meeting with them is that, yes, they did the analysis and that drew them to the conclusion that it was unsafe and a public safety hazard, and that they had to immediately order a dismantling of the facade. So that they said they have that analysis. Now, we haven't seen that analysis, right? So that is one of the questions is, if that analysis is done, it should be readily available for us to review, and we should be able to agree that that is in fact public safety. The issue is that many people are not believing that it is such a, as Tina just pointed out, in her building, there was a 9-inch movement and it took 6 months before a stop work order came into place. So the sort of the question about that DOB analysis, I think, is what is driving this kind of argument. And I think in terms of an engineer's report, I think it's a combination. Right now, the developer has stated they have a third-party engineer. I don't know exactly what that means, but they have a third-party engineer coming in, an independent engineer that somebody else chooses, but that the developer pays for. That's another road to take. But I need clarification what the developer meant by a third-party engineer. So does that answer your questions?
But let me just jump in here for clarification, if I may. I'm sorry. Just in my own particular building, they issued a stop work order as soon as the movement was noticed. It took them 9 months to actually make sure the cross lot bracing was set in place. In other words, a stop work order was issued. The remediation was allowed to lag on for 9
Okay.
months, even though
All
it was
right.
a
Thanks for
very
that.
good
Thanks.
situation. Just want to make sure that was clarified. Thank you.
Appreciate that clarification. All right. I think that Dave was next.
Okay, just a few thoughts. Pamela is absolutely right that their cost for constructing basically a small skyscraper in the backyard is going to be enormously reduced by having those facades out of the way. You might say, well, it's probably going to cost them as much to disassemble and completely reassemble brick by brick the facades as to preserve them, but it will be cheaper for them to get those out of the way. And I think it's important to note that there's kind of an implicit quid pro quo in any kind of project like this when it is presented to us and to the Landmarks Commission. Of course, no one wants a skyscraper in a historic district. It's a mid-rise, high-rise. But look at how beautifully we're going to restore your historic buildings. Otherwise, they'll just continue to decay. That is an implicit quid pro quo that was part of Landmark's approval, and I'm sure of the commissioner's votes on the approval of the tower. So the fact that this is coming up after that approval was gained is suspicious to me. And these are big boy developers. I don't think they bought this building without hiring a structural engineer to look it over first, even as you would hire a building inspector to look over any house you were going to buy. The independence of a structural engineer to do a separate report is an issue. I know a structural engineer who was offered money to do a report condemning the oldest house in Chelsea and turned it down. I worked for a city agency that wanted the building out of the way. They hired a structural engineer. The report said the building could be restored. They hired another structural engineer who said it couldn't be. And it's gone now. So, I don't know how feasible it is that they could hire an independent structural engineer. I think that would help. An alternate position for us would be, we don't care about a structural engineering report. These facades can be restored at some cost. That we know to be true. And we're going to call on you to restore them. Forget about the structural report. You bought them, you're going to fix them. And finally, for our letter, in terms of a stop work, we're not stopping anyone from stabilizing the buildings and getting rid of the structural issue. We're stopping them from then demolishing them as opposed to rebuilding them safely in place. So I don't think this goes to our undermining the safety motive of the Department of Buildings. And I don't know if any of you others would like to weigh in on the idea of simply dismissing the idea of a structural report, which can be spun many ways. And we could even get, a completely independent structural engineer who was conservative. And I know that for some amount of money, these facades can be restored. That's my input for now.
Thank you, David. Pam, you're next.
I just wanted to point out that the shoring work has been done. The danger is past. They are not going to fall down because they've got massive steel beams in place to hold them in place while they are being dismantled. So it's not a question of that CB4 is recommending allowing these buildings to drop on the stroller as it passes by in the street. That moment has passed. That was it.
Thank you. Carrie?
Yeah, first, I didn't say this before, but thank you all for working on this for so long and hard, because obviously you have. Thanks, Marty, for letting me know that we don't need to wait for the full board, because I think that's a much better option. I think that Pam is right, that we need to add our elected officials to a letter if that's what this committee agrees to write. And just real quick on, the future, which I think, we kind of have glossed over that because this feels like such an emergency right now. I think not doing anything is a real statement about the future. And if we're gonna say, we need to make a stand, and I don't mean grandstanding, but like we need to try to stop this project from moving forward the way at least it's been described to me tonight. if we're gonna be able to make any changes. So I do think this would be like the first step future forward, and maybe it helps to think about that in this way. And somebody else mentioned something about a kind of study or of all of these buildings so that we know where they are and what they are before we get to this point. And perhaps that needs to go back as a line item into the budget. Can somebody help me out with that? Somebody mentioned we should be keeping track of all of these old buildings so we know exactly what the condition is. I think maybe we should think about that as an item for the budget. Thank you.
I think somebody
Thank you.
said for next time, not this budget process, but for the next time. I think Jesse even maybe supported that. I think
Marty had his hand up next. Marty?
Thank you. I want to support what I heard David say. I don't care whether there's an independent study done or not. I care that the wall get fixed. And if David's statement is correct, and the letter should say, we know that the wall can be fixed. We know it will cost some money. That's not our problem. The wall should be fixed, period. If that means that you guys have to hire a structural engineer to figure it out, that's your problem, not ours. So we shouldn't be telling them how to do it. We should just tell them to do it.
So
that's what the letter should say.
So is the statement, the wall should be restored in place without dismantling? Is that the statement you would like to see?
Yes.
Yeah, I would too, and I think that's an important precedent that developers can't assume they can go to the Department of Buildings and get a structural assessment from DOB that says it's unsafe. Who knows how many historic buildings DOB would find unsafe? Of course, they're going to be conservative. And
all right. So let's get Betty. Betty, I know that I sort of I see Betty's hand going up now because I've been like,
okay.
Hand raise only.
I had to
talk about this for 45 minutes. Hand raise only.
I had to let the dog get walked.
Can I finish a statement and then Betty goes? I'm sort of pissed off at this, and that's why I'm taking an active part, a role in the conversation. I have said to a number of friends that the community board is often the arm of the real estate industry. And this is an example of where the industry, the real estate industry, is taking us and wiggling us around to accomplish something that we hadn't thought of and we hadn't intended. We are volunteers, and if they I don't want to accuse anybody of having done nefarious stuff, but we spent a lot of time talking about this building. I've walked by it and told friends this is what they're going to do. We've all done that kind of stuff, and now this. That's why I'm agitated about it. We shouldn't be an arm of the real estate industry. We should tell them to fix the wall. Period. I'm sorry, Betty. I cut you off. You go.
Okay, so a couple of things. I would be comfortable if we said, stop the plan for dismantling the facades and repair and preserve them without dismantling them, and stop work if you even started that. I would not be comfortable of stopping the safety work, because I think we would be looking very silly in the neighborhood if we said we asked DOB to stop safety measures. So that's how I feel. I feel that.
Has not the shoring work already been done?
Well, if there's any other safety measure that they have to take, I wouldn't want it to be interpreted that we're stopping them from doing a safety measure, but that's the way I feel. I don't want us to look like we don't care about the public. Anyway, so I think we could live with that, and then I do think that we should ask for the engineer's report that the safety measures were needed for this emergency. I support that. I think that we should deserve to have some analysis of what, and and then an analysis for the work going ahead. But that wouldn't be for DOB. I think that would be for the developer, which they seem to have committed to do. That they have said that they would get a third-party structural engineer and to design stabilization measures to safely, I guess, during facade deconstruction to maintain and to preserve the remaining structure. That isn't really what we wanted. So, but I think we could modify it by saying, okay, have an engineering report to show us how you would fix and preserve the facades without dismantling them. That they should have a report on that. So a report from DOB explaining what did they discover and how did they determine that as compared to just an old building. And then the structural report from the developer, I guess, in discussion with LPC for stopping the idea of dismantling and fixing and preserving the existing facade. So that's, you got that, Paul?
Yes, and I'm in agreement with you on this. So I don't think we need to. And just in terms of the letter, you know, as I sit here and think through the process, we have to keep in mind that it's ultimately Lowell's signature on these letters. So the executive committee meeting is Monday evening. I'd like to go through executive committee to get them to approve this letter and then get ratification at full board so that we could speed up the timetable.
I have
Go ahead, Pam.
one tiny nitpicky comment to make, which is that the original condemnation, the original order to demolish these that was done on the basis of a 311 phone call and done by a building inspector, not an engineer. When you get it's a crapshoot who's going to show up, what building inspector is going to show up. I have met a whole bunch of building inspectors who just didn't know what they were looking at.
Right.
So if there's, do we know that this condemnation was
Well, I don't think the
done
word
by engineering?
we don't know, but I don't think the word condemnation is the right word. And I think that
what would be more appropriate?
They said there was an analysis done, and it was done, and the presentation was made to us by Tim Lynch at DOB, who is an engineer. So I maybe leapt to the conclusions of the distinction between inspector and engineer, but
vast difference.
Pam, I'm saying that the engineer told us that there was an analysis done that required the dismantling of the facade. So I heard it from the engineer at the Department of Building. So I don't know who actually did, and that goes back to the original point. We have not seen anything in writing, right? We have not seen any reports. We have not seen anything from them, and we've asked for it. The city council members asked for it, and it hasn't been forthcoming. That's part of my frustration, is that, you know, they have this fast timetable, and as a couple of people have pointed out, if these things are available, they should be available, and they're not. So I don't like to make statements that I'm not certain about what the facts are. So
I've gained a certain I've gained a certain appreciation of Marty's point of view, and I think David expressed it as well. It really doesn't make a damn bit of difference what the engineers' reports say. It isn't that we want them to figure out if it's possible to save the facades. We want them to just do it. You know, we know it can be done. Everybody knows it can be done. It's just a matter of what it's going to cost to do it. It should be done, and their feet should be held to the fire, and they should do it.
All right, so
Jesse wants to say something.
Can I make, I think then you need to write the letter to both LPC and DOB. This is not, DOB his job is to manage the zoning, to enforce the zoning resolution and building safety. And what we're asking DOB to do is say that this owner came in front, they came in front of DOB for sure, obviously for a number of permits, but they came in, what we're more feeling that we've been betrayed is that they came before LPC and presented this whole thing and didn't do it. So we need LPC, this goes back to the first issue, which is that we need LPC to take a stronger stance on this and be more involved. And so I just think you need to write it to both agencies. Because DOB was I'll be honest with you, when we've met with DOB and Paul went after DOB saying, well, can we include this about preserving this, and preserving this, DOB pushed back and said that we're not prescriptive that way. That's not what we're going to tell them that they need to solve the public safety issue. The building wall is, from our perspective, is really unsafe. They've got to come up with a plan. We want them to say, we want the plan to be spend as much money as it takes and however long that takes to keep the wall up and figure out the plan. And that's really LPC, right? That's LPC's bandwidth to say, wait a second, we gave you the certificate of appropriateness. You made a deal with us and now you're welching on the deal. And so that's why I think if you're going to do this, I think you need to include both. And you've got to say that what we've been saying from the beginning, which is that we need them to be working together on this much more. And that LPC needs to take a lead in the deal that
what we were trying to say in the administrative letter. But
right. Yeah.
Anyway, I think we should wrap up.
I just want to make one more point. And that we all know this already.
We're going to allow more
we
points.
all
Kit,
know this
Kit,
already.
Hold on, Kit had his hand up. If we're going to allow people to speak, Kit had his hand up first. So let's go in order. Kit.
Surprised that it worked.
I try.
I know you have been trying, and I appreciate that. I respect everyone's point of view. I just want to share that based on my current understanding of what's going to be in the letter, I'm not going to be supporting it. I'm not comfortable with a course of action where we are presupposing what the solution should be before we've seen the analysis. I very much agree with the process issues that have been described with LPC and with DOB. But if we're going to say in a letter, we have not yet seen the analysis, but the solution needs to be this, when there's a safety issue, that feels irresponsible to me, and it's not something I can get behind.
But we're not telling them not to stabilize the building. It's going to be stabilized.
David, please. Pam was going to be next. Let's raise hands, please. Like Pam, you blurted out next, so you get to go next.
Okay, I just want to impress everybody that thing we already know. We're not just talking about a single townhouse on 20th Street, tragic as that may be. We are talking about 9 buildings here. All of them are landmark buildings, 9 buildings. What an incredible precedent this is that we have to deal with. So what we're deciding is just crucially important tonight. That's all.
All right, David, do you have anything else to add? We are trying to wrap up.
I'll make a motion for the letter we've been talking about.
Thank you. Kit, do you want to second that?
I will second that.
Second, Carrie, thank you.
I think you need to just describe the letter, Paul.
All right, so the letter will be a letter to Department of Buildings as well as to LPC, asking for an immediate stop work order as long as public safety issues have been met and the building has been shored enough to allow for public safety, and that independent structural analysis should be done and provided to the community, and efforts should be made to find the solution of restoring in place without dismantling the facade.
I would not say effort should be made, that the facade should be restored in place.
Well, the reason I just said
I
effort
would
should be made,
support
David, is
effort should be made.
to address Kit's concern that he raised, that he's not comfortable with the committee being prescriptive in an area that we do not have the information on. And so I was trying to be respectful of Kit's concern. That's why I said effort should be made.
That's so weak.
I think we,
You know,
I think we.
Well, let's hear, hold on.
All we have
Let's hear
to
from
say is
David,
that.
David and Pam, we know your position. I'd be interested to hear if any
Well-
other members of the committee support language, effort should be made to restore the wall in place without dismantling, or if we should say, if we should be as prescriptive as David and Pam want it to be. So Twee, you had your
I
hand up.
agree. Yes, I agree with Kit in his view, whether it's 9 buildings or 1 building, it's still going to be the same point of view.
Okay, thank you. Viren?
One thing, I'm not quite sure, where are we being prescriptive? We're not saying do this or that. We're not saying how to do it. If you tell them how to do it, then you're being prescriptive. If you're asking for what you want, that is just stating your position as a community board that we would like to see these facades remain in place without compromising safety, public safety, and safety of the people working there, whatever.
So you'd be comfortable, we said, we'd like to see?
Yes, we want. I would like to say we want these facades to be retained in place.
CV4 calls for these facades to be retained in place.
Kit, how are you
sounds
feeling on
good.
that? Kit and Twee, how are you feeling on that language? Call for?
I think it's hard to say without actually seeing it in writing. If we're moving away from we want to see an analysis and then we want to see a plan that definitely preserves the bricks, to we want to see an analysis and we want a plan that makes sense based on what the analysis indicates, then I can get behind that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Eventually, if they are going to save the facades, they're going to need, a plan that shows how it's going to be done safely, and that should have structural engineering input. And in fact, what they should do is go out and hire somebody like Silman Associates, which is, right here in New York, one of the world's premier firms.
Well,
They're doing major structural interventions on historic buildings, and there are a lot of others. They don't even have to go with a heavy hitter like that.
David, you're contradicting yourself now, because you said before any engineer's report can say whatever it wants to say. So we're certainly not going to recommend a specific engineering company to come in and do this. So
That's not what he's suggesting.
Let's not go down that path. Let's find the language solution to this letter that will feel comfortable with everybody having a resolution here. So we would like to see we would like the buildings to remain in place, because they do have a plan. Keep in mind, if we say you need a plan, they have a plan. Their plan is to dismantle by hand and replace brick by brick and rebuild, right? That's not the plan we like, but that is their plan. And we would like them to keep the walls up the entire time and restore them in place. That's what we would
restore
like.
in place is the critical expression.
That's what we would like. But as Kit's pointed out, and Twee is echoing, is that, we don't have the analysis ourselves. We have not been hired to be on site. We have not, neither Dave or Viren, our 2 architects on the panel, haven't walked the site. We don't have an engineer who's walked the site. So it's hard for us to say we need to do this. So I think that we want to find some language that is acceptable to all, that recognizes what we want, while also recognizing that we don't have all the data we need to make a conclusive decision. So that's what I'm trying to work through here.
Can I make this? No.
Sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say maybe we just go back to what the original commitment was, right? The certificate of appropriateness was approved for, and what they committed to when they came before us, right? And we just, can we make it that simple and say, you know, that's what we expect of the developer to do. And we want the agencies that have been in charge of approving that process to meet that benchmark.
Well, normally, Jesse, I would agree with you, but the problem is that the certificate of appropriateness was very vague in the way that the facade would be handled. So just it says the facade, it recognizes that the facades have gone through a lot of changes. It says in the certificate of appropriateness that the removal and reconstruction of the outer wide of bricks at the front facades of the houses may be warranted by the deteriorated conditions, and the salvaged brick will then be reused and reinstalled where feasible. So I would
Outer width, the outer width. That doesn't mean the whole thing, the whole 9 yards. It just means the outer width of brick.
And what they're saying to us is that the whole facade is unstable and unsafe and deteriorated, right? So the outer, how do you hold up the outer width without holding up the rest of the facade? Right? They say the back, the facade is deteriorated, and the sidewalls, everything is deteriorated. So I don't understand.
There's the face brick, and then there's a couple of layers of brick behind it. Those are called width of brick. That's a architect's phrase I learned in grammar school. The outer width is the public face of the building, and they make it a pretty brick, and there it is. Right behind it is the backup brick, and there's at least two. Help me out here, guys. There will be at least two more width of brick, often three, that supports the outer width. Okay, so their proposal was that they would take off the outer width of brick as much as necessary and clean it up and reinstall it and remortar it. Not that they would destroy the facades. The whole thing would be gone, everything. So you could walk all the way through from the street to the back wall at grade. That's a whole different cat.
That's helpful. Okay, so that's helpful. So that can then, so maybe we could use the actual language that's in there then and just reinforce it and say that the only thing you may be able to remove is the outer width and leave the remaining facade. Okay, all right, I'm more comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Pam.
The outer width is ornamental. The rest of it is structural. It's there to hold up. It's there, like I said before, the street facades are curtain walls, basically, that are intended to, all they ever really have to hold up is the windows, the lintels and sills and the windows. That's what they're there for. They're not holding the building up at all. Okay, they don't have joists pocket into them that are the structural that hold the building up. They go the other direction.
So we want to call for the restoration in place without dismantling, and we want the engineer's report to be produced to give us information that would support the deal to make this happen. Okay, all right.
An independent engineer's report.
We already have that in the previous letter, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Brad's hand went up. Brad.
Haven't heard from Brad.
I know, we haven't heard from Brad. And
Where'd he go?
Brad, are you going to unmute, or you lowered your hand without talking? There we go.
I just think we could be maybe 3 points in the letter that we support the safety that DOB is advised. Now that the building's shored up, we'd like a plan to keep in place the wall without removal. Now, I'm looking at these pictures, and you could see when they demoed around the windows, they took out the support. You could also see where they, and David will tell you, you could see where they pulled out the electric, which is that line below the window. What I would like to see is to ask for, they made a mistake in the field. We like them to correct it. Like, did the demo contractor cause this? That's all I'm saying. And I think Kit's right. We don't want to get involved with public safety. Lynch is a stand-up guy. I think you know that, Paul. So I'm with Jesse, 1 to landmarks, 1 saying we want to keep it in place. They're demoing everything in the back. They're not stopping anything.
They say,
And by the way, when they do the demo, the reshore should have been in place. So that's a mistake to begin with, in my opinion. So they knew they had to maintain it. That shoring should be in place when you're taking demo out. I know we're going around in circles, Paul. I'd like to bring it to a conclusion.
I think it's important to state what we want the structural engineering report for. You know, it's not to say, oh yeah, the facade has to come down and prove it to us. It's to ensure that everything is going to go forward safety. And I think when Betty first raised it, she meant that it should apply to the stabilization, not to speak for you, Betty. And when you file anything with the Department of Buildings, I mean, it has to be, it's got to be feasible, and it's got to be stamped by an architect or structural engineer anyway, who is verifying that it's safe. So presumably any stabilization of the facade in place, any restoration of it in place would have the involvement of a licensed engineer or architect, which I would hope would satisfy Kit's concerns. Maybe, you know, if we are vague about why we want the structural engineering report, I think that makes our letter vague.
okay. Betty, you good?
I'm good. This is beyond my brain power now. My brain is, going away.
Fried.
Well,
brain.
I get up very early and I go to bed early, so it's 9:45. So I'm beyond my my time. So Paul, take it away.
All right, so go back to we're going to have a letter to Department of Building, Department of LPC, stating that we support the safety measures because we're concerned about public safety issues. We want a plan to keep in place restoration of the facade without removal. We'll incorporate the language from the certificate of appropriateness, as Jesse pointed out, so that it just reinforces what's happening. So we're going to ask for the stop order and ask for a report to show us how this can be done.
Fine. All right.
All right.
Should we say anything about what a poor precedent it would set if, developers were able to?
I'm less interested in this letter becoming a statement of precedence and all of that.
This is urgent.
It just is, this is a very urgent, like 1 paragraph letter.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, I agree with you. I think that should be.
Keep it simple.
All right.
I make a motion to vote on this letter as Paul described.
Is there a second?
Carrie
Okay.
seconds. Okay.
All vote.
All in favor?
Let's go.
Brad, you're going to have to speak your vote. I don't see a video on you. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Anybody present not eligible? Okay, so one vote in opposition, the rest in favor. Betty and I will get that out. And again, procedurally, we'll get it to executive committee for their approval. So then it goes to full board for ratification at our November meeting. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night,
Zach.
everybody.
Zach, thanks for hanging in there for this whole thing.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.